I spent 7 years working across the globe to buy my mother her dream home in cash. When I finally flew back to Texas to surprise her, my brother's wife answered my front door in a silk robe with a glass of wine in her hand. She looked right at me and told me the maid was out back scrubbing the patio. The maid she was talking about was my own mother, but I still held the deed. By Friday night, I had changed every lock and cut off every dime. If you have ever had to put an entitled family member in their place, let me know where you are watching from in the comments. Hit the like button and subscribe to see how I took back what was mine. My name is Julia. I am 33 years old, and until a blistering Tuesday afternoon in July, I truly believed my sacrifices were buying my family happiness. I work as a senior supply chain director for a major international logistics firm. It is a demanding career that required me to spend the last 7 years living out of suitcases in London and Dubai. I missed Thanksgivings. I missed birthdays. I worked 80-hour weeks in different time zones negotiating contracts and managing global shipments, while my friends back home were getting married and starting families. I did it all for one specific reason. I wanted to give my mother Linda the peaceful retirement she deserved. My mother had spent her entire life working double shifts to keep a roof over our heads after my father walked out. She sacrificed everything so my older brother Jason and I could have a chance at a decent life. Jason was always her blind spot. He was the golden child, the one who could do no wrong, even as he bounced from one failed business venture to another. I was the reliable one, the daughter expected to figure things out on my own. And I did. 2 years ago, I received a massive corporate bonus. Instead of buying luxury cars or designer clothes, I used every single penny of it to purchase a beautiful, sprawling house in an upscale suburb of Austin, Texas. The house cost $800,000, and I bought it outright in cash. I put the deed entirely in my name to protect the asset, but I handed the keys over to my mother so she could finally live like a queen. I had not been back to the United States since I bought the property. The pandemic, followed by a massive supply chain crisis, kept me grounded overseas. But this July, my company finally forced me to take a month of accumulated paid leave. I decided not to tell anyone I was coming. I wanted to walk up the driveway, ring the doorbell, and see the look of pure joy on my mother's face when she realized her daughter was finally home. The Texas heat hit me like a physical wall when I stepped out of my rideshare at the end of the cul-de-sac. I pulled my heavy suitcase up the driveway, taking in the pristine landscaping and the imposing brick facade of the home I had worked so hard to purchase. It was exactly as beautiful as I remembered from the real estate listing photos. But as I walked closer, a knot of confusion began to form in my stomach. There was a brand new gleaming white Porsche parked directly in the center of the driveway. My mother did not drive a Porsche. She drove a sensible 10-year-old sedan. I assumed Jason must be visiting. My brother had recently married Chelsea, a woman I had only met briefly over video calls. Chelsea was an aspiring social media influencer who always seemed more interested in the background of my Dubai apartment than in actually getting to know me. I hauled my luggage up the front steps, my heart pounding with anticipation. I was exhausted. The 14-hour flight from London, followed by a layover, and the drive from the airport had completely drained me. I was wearing loose sweatpants, a faded cotton shirt, and running shoes. I had no makeup on, my hair was pulled back in a messy knot, and I had lost nearly 40 pounds over the past few years due to the intense stress of my job and a strict new fitness routine. I looked entirely different from the girl who had left Texas 7 years ago. I pressed the doorbell, hearing the soft melodic chime echo inside the massive house. I waited, shifting my weight from foot to foot, a wide smile forming on my face. I expected to hear my mother's familiar, hurried footsteps. Instead, the door swung open to reveal a woman who looked like she had just stepped out of a luxury spa commercial. It was Chelsea. She was wearing a floor-length designer silk robe, her blonde hair perfectly styled in loose waves. In her right hand, she held a large crystal glass filled with white wine. It was barely 2 o'clock in the afternoon. She stood in the doorway of the house I bought, blocking the entrance, and looked me up and down with an expression of profound disgust. Her eyes dragged over my wrinkled travel clothes and my scuffed sneakers, her lip curling in a visible sneer. "Can I help you?" she asked, her tone dripping with condescension. I opened my mouth to speak, but the sheer arrogance of her stance caught me off guard. Chelsea did not recognize me. She had only seen me through pixelated, carefully angled video calls years ago, back when I was heavier and dressed in corporate suits. To her, standing on the porch of this affluent suburban home, I was just a tired, disheveled stranger. "Hi, Chelsea." I started, my voice hoarse from the long journey. "I am looking for Linda." "We do not buy from solicitors," she interrupted sharply, waving her manicured hand as if shooing away an insect. "We have a strict no solicitation policy in this neighborhood. You people really need to learn how to read the signs at the gate." "I am not selling anything," I said, my initial shock rapidly transforming into a cold, hard focus. "I am looking for Linda. Is she inside?" Chelsea let out an exasperated sigh and took a slow sip of her wine. She leaned against the expensive mahogany doorframe, looking incredibly bored by my existence. "Oh, you are looking for the maid," she said smoothly. "She is out back scrubbing the patio. You will have to go around the side gate. Do not track dirt onto the driveway when you leave." The words hung in the hot Texas air, freezing the blood in my veins despite the blistering heat. The maid. She had just called my mother the woman this entire estate was purchased for. The maid. A suffocating silence stretched between us for 3 agonizing seconds. I stared into Chelsea's smug, entitled eyes, processing the magnitude of what she had just revealed. My mother, a 60-year-old woman who had worked her entire life to exhaustion, was outside in 100-degree heat, scrubbing a patio, while her son's wife drank wine in a silk robe inside the air-conditioned mansion I paid for. "Well," Chelsea snapped, clearly annoyed that I was still standing on her porch. "Run along. I have clients to prepare for." She stepped back and moved to slam the heavy front door in my face. In a fraction of a second, years of corporate negotiation, high-stakes problem-solving, and raw primal protectiveness over my mother took control of my body. Before the heavy wood could click shut, I shot my right foot forward, wedging my thick travel boot firmly between the door and the frame. The door hit my boot with a dull thud and bounced back. Chelsea gasped, her wine sloshing precariously near the rim of her crystal glass. "Excuse me," she shrieked, her eyes wide with sudden outrage. "What do you think you are doing? Remove your foot right now or I am calling the police." I did not raise my voice. I did not blink. I pushed my hand flat against the heavy mahogany wood and shoved the door fully open with enough force to make Chelsea stumble backward into the grand foyer. The blast of cold air conditioning from the house washed over my face, carrying the scent of expensive vanilla candles and utter entitlement. I grabbed the handle of my heavy suitcase and dragged the wheels right over the pristine marble threshold. "Hey, Chelsea," screamed, her voice echoing off the high ceilings. "You cannot just walk in here. Are you crazy?" I said, "Get out." I ignored her completely. My eyes scanned the foyer, noting the expensive modern art on the walls and the sleek minimalist furniture that certainly had not been purchased by my mother. The house felt foreign, sterile, and entirely stripped of Linda's warm, cozy aesthetic. I dropped the handle of my suitcase, letting it stand in the center of the entryway, and began walking purposefully down the wide hallway. "You are trespassing," Chelsea yelled, trailing behind me in a panic, careful not to spill her drink. "I mean it. I am calling the police. You are going to jail." I did not look back. I did not care about her threats, her wine, or her silk robe. Every muscle in my body was coiled tight, with a singular, terrifying focus. I strode past the massive chef's kitchen, past the sprawling living room with its velvet sectionals, and made a direct line for the towering sliding glass doors at the back of the house. I had to see the backyard. I had to see what they had done to my mother. The heavy glass slider glided open, and the oppressive Texas heat immediately slammed into my chest. The air outside was thick, radiating off the pristine limestone pavers that surrounded an enormous sparkling blue infinity pool. I stepped onto the patio, my boots making no sound against the stone. At first glance, the backyard was a picture of suburban paradise, complete with a massive outdoor kitchen, a stone fire pit, and imported lounge chairs. But my eyes bypassed the luxury completely. They locked onto a small, frail figure huddled in the far corner near the built-in barbecue grill. It was my mother. She was on her hands and knees on the scorching limestone, wearing faded, oversized sweatpants and a thin cotton shirt that was completely soaked with sweat. Her gray hair was plastered to the back of her neck, and she was aggressively scrubbing at a thick, blackened puddle of grease that had pooled beneath the grill. A cheap plastic bucket of soapy, dirty water sat beside her, radiating the harsh chemical smell of industrial degreaser. She looked so small, so fragile, and so heartbreakingly old. The woman who had raised me, the woman I had spent 7 years crossing oceans to protect, was reduced to a servant in her own backyard. I stood frozen for a split second, my heart shattering into 1,000 jagged pieces. She had aged a decade in the 2 years since I last saw her on video. Her shoulders were hunched, her movements painfully slow and labored. The sun was beating down mercilessly on her unprotected back. It had to be over 100 degrees out there. Every scrub of the heavy bristle brush looked like it was draining the last ounce of life from her bones. "Mom," I whispered, my voice breaking. The sound of my voice barely carried over the hum of the pool filter, but she heard it. She froze, her entire body going rigid. Slowly, painfully, she turned her head. When her tired, sunken eyes met mine, the color completely drained from her sunburned face. For a moment, we just stared at each other. I saw the immediate crushing wave of shame wash over her features. She dropped the scrub brush into the dirty water with a splash and scrambled to push herself upright, wiping her wet, chemical-covered hands on her sweatpants. She stumbled slightly, her knees clearly aching from the hard stone. "Julia," she gasped, her voice trembling with panic and disbelief. "Sweetheart, what are you doing here? You did not say you were coming home." I closed the distance between us in 3 long strides. I fell to my knees right there on the greasy patio and reached for her hands. They were raw red and shaking violently. Blisters were forming on her palms, and her knuckles were swollen. I could feel the tremendous unnatural heat radiating off her skin. She was on the verge of heat stroke. "Mom, what are you doing out here?" I asked, my voice barely a breathless whisper, as I looked at the dark circles under her eyes. "Why are you cleaning this? Where is your room? Why did Chelsea say you were the maid?" The question spilled out of me in a frantic rush. My mother tried to pull her hands away, her gaze darting nervously toward the sliding glass doors where I had just left Chelsea. Fresh tears welled up in her eyes, spilling over her flushed cheeks and mixing with the sweat. "Oh, Julia, please do not be upset," she pleaded, her voice cracking with that familiar desperate need to keep the peace. "It is not what it looks like. I was just helping out. Chelsea had some friends over for a barbecue last night, and the grill got a little messy. You know I like to keep busy." I shook my head, refusing to accept the obvious lie. "You are scrubbing grease off the floor in the middle of a Texas summer. You look exhausted." "Where is your bedroom, Mom? Show me your room right now." She looked down at the limestone tiles, a fresh wave of tears sliding down her face. She sniffled, refusing to meet my eyes. "It is just temporary," she mumbled, her voice so low I had to lean in to hear her. "Jason is going through a very important phase right now. You know how stressful his businesses are." "He is 35 years old," I said, the shock slowly giving way to a deep, burning anger. "What does his business have to do with where you sleep?" Linda swallowed hard, her shoulders trembling. "He needed the master suite, Julia. His new tech startup requires a lot of space for his equipment and his client calls. He has to have a professional background for his video meetings. And Chelsea, well, she has her wellness brand now. She needed the first guest room to set up her Pilates recording studio, and the second guest room is her inventory closet for all her influencer packages. They are just so busy, sweetheart. They are building their future." My mind struggled to process the sheer audacity of her words. The master suite, 2 guest bedrooms. That accounted for the entire main living space of the house I had purchased. The house I had specifically chosen because the ground floor master suite would be perfect for my aging mother's joints. "So where are you sleeping?" I demanded, my grip tightening on her hands. "Tell me where you sleep, Mom." She pointed a trembling, soap-covered finger toward the far edge of the property. Tucked away behind a row of tall privacy hedges baking in the relentless afternoon sun was a small wooden structure. It was the garden shed. The previous owners had built it to store lawnmowers and pool chemicals. It had one tiny window, a corrugated metal roof, and zero insulation. There was no air conditioning unit visible, just a raw wooden box roasting in the brutal heat. "I fixed it up real nice inside," Linda added quickly, her tone frantic as she tried to manage my reaction. "Jason put a fan in there for me, and I have a comfortable cot. It is really quiet, Julia. I do not mind the shed at all. It gives them the space they need to grow. You cannot be mad at your brother for trying to succeed." The air seemed to get sucked out of my lungs. My mother, the woman who had sacrificed her youth, her health, and her happiness to raise us, was sleeping on a cot in a sweltering garden shed. She was treating it like a favor. She was defending the son who had banished her to a wooden box, while he and his entitled wife lived in luxury inside the house I had paid for. Jason had taken the safety and comfort I provided for my mother and claimed it for himself, reducing her to unpaid domestic labor. The heartbreak I felt looking at her withered face instantly vanished. It was entirely consumed by a blinding white-hot rage. It was a kind of fury I had never experienced in my entire life. It started in my chest and radiated outward, sharpening my senses and turning my vision crystal clear. The sadness evaporated, replaced by a cold, calculating determination. The golden child illusion was going to die today, and I was going to be the one to kill it. I stood up very, very slowly. The hot limestone pavers burned right through the thick rubber soles of my shoes, but I barely registered the blistering heat. My eyes remained locked on the miserable wooden structure tucked behind the manicured privacy hedges. I did not say a single word. I simply turned away from my trembling mother and began walking toward the garden shed. Linda scrambled to her feet behind me, her wet sneakers squeaking against the stone as she hurried to catch up. She grabbed at the fabric of my shirt, her fingers leaving damp patches of soapy water on my sleeve. She was begging me to stop, her voice a frantic, breathy whisper. She kept repeating that it was perfectly fine, that I was overreacting, that she had everything she needed in that tiny wooden box. Her desperate attempts to protect the son who had banished her to a literal oven only fueled the fire raging in my chest. I gently reached back and removed her hand from my shirt. I did not stop walking until I stood directly in front of the shed. The structure was painted a dull gray, its cheap metal handle rusted from the humidity. I reached out and pulled the door open. A wave of stagnant, suffocating air hit my face instantly. It was easily 20 degrees hotter inside the shed than it was out on the open patio. The smell of hot dust, old lawn chemicals, and stale sweat was overpowering. I stepped inside the dark, cramped space, my eyes adjusting to the dim light filtering through the single dirty window. What I saw inside completely broke whatever fragments of patience I had left. A cheap folding camping cot was shoved against the far wall. A thin, worn-out sleeping bag was tossed over it, serving as a mattress. Next to the cot sat a single plastic milk crate that my mother was apparently using as a nightstand. On top of the crate rested a cheap battery-operated fan, blowing weakly, doing absolutely nothing to circulate the thick, suffocating air. A stack of plastic storage bins in the corner held all of my mother's worldly possessions. Her entire life, decades of memories and hard work, had been reduced to a few plastic boxes in a windowless shed. I looked up at the ceiling. There was no insulation. The raw wooden beams radiated heat directly downward like a broiler. This was the environment my brother had deemed suitable for the woman who had given him everything. This was the retirement I had funded with 7 years of my own sweat and isolation. I had bought an $800,000 five-bedroom estate with central air conditioning, imported hardwood floors, and a custom chef's kitchen. And the woman holding the deed to that property was sleeping on a canvas cot, surrounded by spiders and rusty garden tools. I stepped back out into the blinding sunlight, pulling the shed door shut with a quiet, deliberate click. Linda was standing a few feet away, wringing her blistered hands together. She looked like a terrified child, waiting to be punished. The sight of her cowering in her own backyard made me physically sick. She had been conditioned over years of emotional manipulation to believe that her comfort was an acceptable sacrifice for Jason's success. She genuinely believed that she deserved to be out here. I walked back toward the barbecue grill where she had been scrubbing. The puddle of dark, sludgy grease still stained the pristine limestone. The cheap plastic bucket of dirty chemical water sat right where she had dropped it. I looked from the bucket to the massive, sparkling infinity pool that dominated the center of the yard. Floating lazily on the crystal-clear blue water was a giant, ridiculous inflatable flamingo. A tray of expensive tanning oils and a folded plush towel rested on a teak lounge chair nearby, clearly waiting for Chelsea to finish her wine and come outside for a tan. The juxtaposition of that extreme, unearned luxury against my mother's agonizing labor snapped the last thread of my restraint. I did not say a word to Linda. I simply bent down and grabbed the thick wire handle of the plastic cleaning bucket. The industrial degreaser burned my nostrils as the dark, sludgy water sloshed against the plastic sides. The bucket was heavy, filled to the brim with the filthy byproduct of my mother's humiliation. I carried the bucket directly to the edge of the pristine infinity pool. Linda gasped, finally realizing what I was about to do. She took a step forward, her voice pitching up in pure panic, begging me not to make a mess because Chelsea would be absolutely furious. I completely and utterly ignored her. I swung the bucket back and hurled the contents directly into the center of the pool. The filthy black grease and sudsy chemical water hit the crystal blue surface with a massive splash. The dark sludge immediately began to spread, clouding the pristine water and coating the ridiculous pink flamingo float in a layer of absolute filth. I did not stop there. I turned back to the grill, picked up the heavy bristle scrub brush, the bottles of toxic degreaser, and the dirty rags my mother had been using. One by one, I launched them into the deep end of the pool. They sank to the bottom, leaving an oily, toxic sheen floating on the surface of Chelsea's perfect suburban oasis. The backyard was completely silent, except for the sound of the pool filter struggling to process the sudden influx of heavy grime. I dusted off my hands, turning my back on the ruined pool, and walked over to my mother. She was trembling so violently, I thought she might collapse right there on the limestone pavers. Tears were streaming down her face, leaving clean tracks through the dust and sweat on her cheeks. She kept whispering that Jason was going to be furious that I did not understand his pressure. I reached out and gently took both of her raw, blistered hands in mine. Her skin was burning hot to the touch. I looked her dead in the eyes, projecting absolute certainty. I needed her to understand that the dynamic of this family was shifting right now in this exact moment, and it was never going back. "Nobody is ever going to yell at you in this house again," I said, my voice dangerously calm and completely steady. "You are never going to scrub another floor, you are never going to apologize for existing, and you are never setting foot in that wooden box ever again. This is your home. I bought it for you. And right now we are going inside to take out the trash." I gave her no single chance to argue with me. I kept my grip firmly on her hand and began walking toward the towering sliding glass doors that led back into the air-conditioned mansion. Linda stumbled for a second, but I pulled her along with me, my stride long and purposeful. We marched across the patio, leaving wet, greasy footprints behind us. I raised my free hand, grabbed the heavy metal handle of the glass door, and threw it open with enough force to rattle the glass in its frame. We stepped out of the blinding Texas heat and into the cool, silent luxury of the living room, ready to face the parasites who had taken over our home. The glass door slid shut behind us, cutting off the growl of the pool pump and trapping the sharp chemical smell inside the living room. The sudden blast of air conditioning made Mom shiver so violently that her teeth clicked. Her soaked cotton shirt clung to her narrow shoulders, and dark grease streaked both knees of her faded sweatpants. She immediately tried to pull away from me when I guided her toward the white velvet sectional. "No, honey," she whispered. "I'll stain it. Chelsea just had this cleaned." I looked at the couch, then at my mother's blistered hands. "Sit down." She hesitated as if I had asked her to commit a crime. I placed both hands on her shoulders and lowered her onto the cushions. The fabric absorbed the sweat and grime. The couch could be replaced. The years they had taken from her could not. Chelsea followed us in from the patio, staring through the glass at the black sludge spreading across the pool. Her face had gone rigid with horror. Then she saw Linda sitting on the sectional and released a scream sharp enough to echo through the foyer. "Get her off that couch," she shouted. "Do you have any idea what that upholstery cost? I turned my head slowly. Say one more word to my mother, and the couch will become the least expensive thing you lose today. Chelsea stopped only long enough to clutch her wine glass against her chest. Then she demanded that I leave, calling me unstable and dangerous. She claimed I had broken into her home, assaulted her, destroyed private property, and contaminated her pool. A door slammed at the far end of the hallway. Jason appeared from the master suite wearing pressed slacks and a white shirt, a wireless headset hanging around his neck. Behind him stood two computer monitors, a ring light and a fake city skyline mounted above the bed I had purchased for Mom. He looked annoyed, not surprised. His first concern was the interruption. "What is going on out here?" he demanded. I was in the middle of an investor call. His eyes moved from Chelsea's ruined expression to the grease on the floor, then finally to Mom sitting on the couch. His jaw tightened. "Julia," he said, as if my name itself were an inconvenience. "You cannot just ambush people like this. Chelsea has worked very hard to create a safe space in this house, and you came storming in with no warning." I stared at him. 7 years of missed holidays and sleepless international flights collapsed into one cold realization. He was not ashamed. He genuinely believed I was the problem. "Your mother was on her knees scrubbing your barbecue grease in 100-degree heat," I said. "She is sleeping in the garden shed." Jason exhaled heavily and rubbed his forehead as though I were a difficult employee, refusing to understand a simple policy. "Here we go," he muttered. "Mom is not being forced to do anything. She has blisters on both hands. She likes helping," he replied. "She gets anxious when she has nothing to do." Mom shifted on the couch. "Jason, please. Julia just got home. Maybe everyone should calm down." He ignored her completely. I stepped closer. "Why are you living in the master suite?" "Because I need it," he said immediately. "My company operates from this property. I need a professional environment for investor meetings, client calls, and product demonstrations. And Chelsea needs 2 guest rooms." Chelsea lifted her chin. "One is my recording studio. The other stores inventory. My brand is a real business, even if you do not respect creative entrepreneurs." I looked back at Jason. "Then where exactly was Mom supposed to live?" He laughed once, a short, contemptuous sound. "You do not get to disappear overseas for 7 years and come back pretending you understand how this household functions. While you were gallivanting around London and Dubai, I stayed here. I became the man of the house. I made the executive decisions necessary to use the space efficiently." "The house was purchased for Mom." "The house was purchased for the family," he corrected. "You may have paid for it, but you were not here. Money does not automatically make you the authority." I pointed toward the backyard. "You put the woman who raised us in an uninsulated box beside pool chemicals. It was temporary. She has been there long enough to move her entire life into plastic bins. She agreed to it, because you trained her to apologize whenever she needed anything." His expression hardened. He stepped closer until only a few feet separated us. "Be very careful, Julia." "No, you be careful." Chelsea moved beside him, emboldened by his posture. "You have no right to threaten my husband in our home." I almost laughed. "Your home?" "Yes, our home," she snapped. "We live here. We maintain it. We host people here. You are an estranged relative who showed up looking like a homeless solicitor and forced your way through my front door." Mom whispered Chelsea's name in warning, but Chelsea spun toward her. "And you," she said, pointing at Mom with one manicured finger, "should be grateful. We let you stay here after everything we have done for you." The room went silent. Jason glanced at his wife but did not correct her. That silence told me everything. I crossed the room until I stood directly between Chelsea and my mother. "Let her stay here." Chelsea realized too late that she had exposed the entire arrangement, but pride would not let her retreat. "She contributes almost nothing. We pay the household expenses. We manage the property. She helps with cleaning in exchange for room and board. Her room is a shed. It is private. It is an oven." Jason raised his voice. "Enough. You are upsetting everyone because you need to feel important. You always do this. You come in acting superior because you have some corporate title and a foreign address." "I came home to see my mother." "And now you have seen her," he said. "So take your luggage and go to a hotel. We can discuss this later when you are emotionally stable." I held his gaze. I am not leaving. His face reddened. You do not have a choice. Chelsea suddenly lifted her phone. The screen was already unlocked, and her thumb hovered over the emergency call button. I am done arguing, she announced. I am calling the police and having this trespasser removed from my property right now. Mom stood abruptly. Chelsea, please do not do that. Chelsea pressed the button. I reached into my travel bag and took out my own phone. It held the county deed property tax records insurance policy and every utility account connected to the address. I opened the secure legal folder and waited for the certified document to load. Chelsea spoke loudly to the dispatcher, claiming a violent intruder had broken into her house. Jason stood beside her with his arms folded, wearing the smug expression of a man certain that uniformed officers would restore the family hierarchy. When Chelsea finished giving the address, she looked at me triumphantly. They are on their way. I smiled and turned the bright screen toward them. Please, I said. I cannot wait to show them the deed. Police lights began flickering across the front windows. A hard knock struck the mahogany door. Chelsea rushed toward the foyer. She flung the heavy mahogany door open and instantly transformed. The arrogant woman who had insulted me on the porch vanished entirely. In her place stood a trembling victim. Two officers stepped into the foyer. Chelsea burst into theatrical sobs. She clutched her silk robe tightly against her chest, pointing a trembling finger in my direction. She told the officers she had been enjoying a quiet afternoon when a deranged woman forced her way inside. She claimed I had shoved her out of the way, stormed through her home, and destroyed her property. She begged them to remove the dangerous intruder. The two officers immediately tensed, shifting into a defensive stance as they looked at me. I could see them taking in the visual cues of the room. On one side, they saw a polished, wealthy couple standing in an $800,000 suburban mansion. On the other side, they saw me. My hair was a messy knot, and I wore faded sweatpants and scuffed travel boots. Next to me sat an older woman covered in sweat and thick dark grease stains. To anyone walking in, Jason and Chelsea looked like homeowners, and I looked like a trespassing vagrant. The lead officer took a slow step into the living room. He held his hand up toward me, but his tone was strictly business. He asked me to step away from the older woman and keep my hands visible. Before I could respond, Jason stepped forward to cement the narrative. He placed a comforting arm around Chelsea, pulling his weeping wife against his side. He looked at the officers with an expression of exhausted patience, playing the role of the responsible patriarch, dealing with an unavoidable family tragedy. "Officer, thank you for getting here quickly," Jason said, his voice smooth and deeply reassuring. "I am incredibly sorry for the disturbance. This woman is my estranged sister, Julia. She has a very long documented history of severe mental instability. She abandoned our family years ago to live overseas, and we have not heard from her in almost a decade. She just showed up today completely unannounced, clearly having a severe manic episode. She broke into my house, assaulted my wife, and started dragging our mother around the property." Jason paused, perfectly letting out a heavy sigh, as if the burden of my existence was simply too much to bear. He looked at me with a mixture of fake pity and deep disappointment. "I am the head of this household," he continued, his tone hardening with authority. "I work very hard to provide a secure home for my wife and mother. I cannot have this kind of danger under my roof. I need her escorted off my property immediately, and I want a restraining order filed later today." The lead officer nodded sympathetically at Jason. It was clear that the impressive house, the designer clothes, and Jason's calm, perfectly measured tone had completely sold the false story. The officer turned his attention back to me, his expression hardening into a mask of absolute authority. He unclipped the radio from his broad shoulder, ready to call in the trespassing report, and focused his intense gaze squarely on my face. "Mom, I need you to listen to me very carefully right now," he said, his voice echoing loudly in the quiet luxury of the living room. "You are trespassing in this gentleman's home. I am going to ask you to turn around, walk toward the front door, and step outside onto the porch. We are going to have a conversation out there, and you are going to leave the premises peacefully today. If you refuse to comply with my instructions, I will have no choice but to place you in handcuffs and forcibly remove you from this private property." Do you understand me clearly? Chelsea let out a dramatic sniffle, burying her face against Jason's chest. I could see the malicious smirk forming on her lips, perfectly hidden from the officer's view. Jason stood a little taller, radiating the smug satisfaction of a man who believed he had just won. They truly thought they had me backed into a corner. They truly believed that their polished lies and this expensive house would be enough to throw me back out into the street. They had spent years relying on my mother's silence to build a fortress of entitlement, and they thought the police were simply going to validate their twisted reality. I did not panic. I did not raise my voice, and I certainly did not move toward the front door. I took a slow, deep breath and allowed a perfectly polite corporate smile to spread across my face. I reached my hand slowly into the front pocket of my travel bag. The secondary officer immediately stepped forward, his hand dropping toward his belt, but I kept my movement smooth and visible. I pulled out my silver smartphone and tapped the screen to wake it up. I opened my secure email application and navigated to a starred folder labeled Legal. I opened the top file, waiting for the certified PDF document to load fully on the bright screen. I did not look at Chelsea. I did not look at Jason. I looked directly into the stern eyes of the lead police officer. I took 2 slow, measured steps across the hardwood floor until I was standing right in front of him. I held out my phone, the screen facing up, and handed the device directly into his waiting palm. "I am not stepping outside," I said, my voice ringing with absolute authority. "And I am not leaving this property. I want you to read the name on the top of that document, officer. Read the registered property tax records, the county title, and the fully executed deed. I am the sole owner of this estate. Those 2 people are unwanted guests, and you are going to help me put them in their place." The lead officer stared down at the brightly illuminated screen of my phone. The tense, authoritative posture he had been holding just seconds ago began to dissolve. His eyes scanned the official county seal at the top of the digital deed, then moved down to read the registered owner information. I watched his brow furrow as he cross-referenced the address on the document with the physical location. He did not say a word at first. He just scrolled slowly, absorbing the undeniable legal reality that completely dismantled the story my brother had sold him. The secondary officer stepped closer to his partner and leaned in to look at the screen. I stood perfectly still, letting the silence in the room stretch out. Chelsea was still clinging to Jason, her fake tears drying up as she sensed the sudden shift in the atmosphere. Jason shifted his weight uncomfortably, his confident smirk faltering. He cleared his throat loudly, attempting to regain control. "Officer, I do not know what she is showing you," Jason said, his voice dripping with forced patience. "But like I told you, she has a history of making things up. She has been estranged from this family for years. You need to escort her out before she becomes violent." The lead officer did not respond to Jason. Instead, he looked up from my phone and met my eyes. The hostility was gone, replaced by a cautious, professional neutrality. "Ma'am," he said, keeping his voice steady, "I am going to need to see a physical piece of government-issued identification to verify the name on this property record. Do you have a driver license or a passport on you?" I reached into my pocket and pulled out my passport, handing it over smoothly. I always travel with it, and it clearly displayed my full legal name, matching the deed perfectly. The officer opened the booklet, looked at my photo, and then looked back down at the digital deed on my phone. He let out a long, heavy breath and handed both my passport and my phone back to me. He turned away from me and faced Jason and Chelsea. "Sir," the officer said, his tone entirely different now. His voice carried the sharp, no-nonsense edge of someone who realized he had been lied to. "The documentation this woman just provided is a legally binding property deed registered with the county. The name on the deed matches her passport perfectly. She is the sole legal owner of this property." Chelsea physically recoiled. She let go of Jason's arm and stared at the officer in absolute horror. "That is impossible!" she shrieked, her voice echoing shrilly off the high ceiling. "This is our house. We live here. Jason is the head of the household. She is lying to you." The secondary officer stepped forward, holding his hands up to calm her down. "Ma'am, we have to go by the legal documentation provided. The property records clearly state that Julia is the owner. Unless you have a lease agreement or a deed showing otherwise, you and your husband are technically residing here as her guests." "Guests?" Chelsea screamed the word, her face turning a blotchy red. She spun around to face Jason, her perfectly styled hair flying around her shoulders. Jason, do something. Tell them this is our house. You said this was our house. Jason was sweating now. The confident patriarch persona was crumbling rapidly. He looked from his hysterical wife to the stern police officers, and finally to me. The panic in his eyes was palpable, but true to his nature, as the golden child. He immediately tried to manipulate his way out of the corner. He took a step toward me, holding his hands out in a placating gesture. "Julia, come on," Jason said, a nervous laugh escaping his throat. "Let us not do this right now. We are blood. We are family. You cannot just come back here after abandoning us for 7 years and try to throw us out into the street. We live here. My business operates out of this house. We have squatters' rights. You cannot legally evict us on the spot without proper notice. It is against the law." I stared at him, marveling at his sheer audacity. He had banished our mother to a sweltering garden shed, drained her finances, and was now trying to lecture me about the law and family loyalty. "I am very aware of the eviction laws in the state of Texas." "Jason," I said, keeping my voice low and terrifyingly calm. "I know that because you have established residency here, I have to go through a formal legal process to permanently remove you from the premises. That is exactly why I am not asking the officers to throw you out onto the curb tonight." Chelsea let out a loud sigh of relief, clearly thinking they had won the battle. She crossed her arms over her silk robe and glared at me, her posture screaming entitlement. "See," she muttered to Jason, "I told you she could not do anything. We have rights." I turned my attention entirely to Chelsea, letting a cold smile touch my lips. "I am not throwing you out tonight," I repeated softly. "But I am reclaiming my space. You are currently occupying the master bedroom, which is the exact room I purchased for my mother to live in comfortably. Since I am the legal owner of this house, I am giving you exactly 1 hour to clear your personal belongings out of that suite. My mother is moving into the master bedroom tonight, and you two will be moving your things into whichever guest room you prefer." Jason's jaw dropped. "You cannot be serious," he sputtered, his face turning purple. "I run my tech startup out of that room. I have an entire professional backdrop set up for my client video calls. You are going to ruin my business operations. I need that space, Julia. Mom is perfectly fine where she is. She likes the privacy out there." The lead officer interjected before I could respond. "Sir, I highly suggest you listen to the homeowner. You are living on her property rent-free. If she wants to move her mother into the master bedroom, she has every legal right to do so. This is a civil matter regarding the living arrangements, but if you escalate this into a domestic disturbance by refusing a reasonable request from the property owner, we will be forced to intervene differently. We will not hesitate to remove anyone causing a threat to the peace. Do you understand?" Jason swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing nervously. He looked at the 2 armed officers, realizing his polished lies had completely failed. The authority in the room belonged entirely to me, and the police were firmly on my side. He gave a stiff, humiliated nod, unable to meet my gaze. "Good," the lead officer said. He turned to me, his expression softening slightly. "Ma'am, we are going to head out now. If they give you any more trouble, or refuse to vacate the room as you requested, call us directly. We have a record of this incident, and we know exactly who the property belongs to." I thanked the officers for their time and professionalism. I walked them to the front door, making sure the heavy mahogany wood clicked securely shut behind them. When I slowly turned back to the living room, the atmosphere was now becoming suffocatingly tense. The heavy mahogany front door clicked shut, sealing us inside the air-conditioned foyer. The silence was absolute. The police were gone, taking the last shred of Jason and Chelsea's illusion with them. I stood watching my brother and his wife process their new reality. Chelsea was trembling, her hands balled into tight fists. Her silk robe suddenly looked less like a symbol of wealth and more like a cheap costume. Jason refused to look at me, his chest heaving with angry breaths. I gave them no time to regroup. I walked directly into the open-concept living room, bypassing the white velvet sectional, and moved straight to the large oak desk in the corner. It was Jason's workspace, littered with expensive monitors and business magazines. I casually swept his paperwork aside, set my backpack on the wood, and pulled out my laptop. What are you doing? Chelsea snapped, her voice trembling with fresh outrage. You cannot just take over his desk. He has to work. I ignored her. I opened my laptop connected to the house network and brought up the web browser. Since my name was on the deed, I was on the master accounts for every utility. I had set the bills to autopay, trusting my mother was enjoying a modern home. I logged into the internet provider portal. They had upgraded to a commercial-grade gigabit fiber connection, the most expensive package available, designed for high-bandwidth streaming. I navigated to the service modification page. I selected the absolute lowest, most basic tier of internet service available, barely sufficient for loading web pages. I clicked confirm. A moment later, a message appeared stating the downgrade would take effect immediately. Within seconds, the smart television mounted on the wall froze. The streaming music abruptly cut out. Chelsea gasped, looking down at her phone as it indicated a loss of connection. Did you just turn off the Wi-Fi? Chelsea demanded, marching toward the desk. Her face flushed red. I need that connection. I have a live Pilates stream scheduled for 4 o'clock. I have brand partnerships depending on that. You cannot do this. I did not look up. I opened a new tab and logged into the premium cable portal. They had subscribed to every available movie channel and sports package. I clicked select all and hit cancel. I am not paying for your influencer lifestyle, I said, my voice completely devoid of emotion. If you want internet to broadcast your workouts, pay for a hotspot using your own money. The free ride is over. Jason finally snapped. He stormed across the room, his face twisted in an ugly sneer, and slammed his hand flat on the desk. You are going to ruin my client calls, Jason shouted, his voice echoing off the high ceilings. I run a legitimate tech startup out of this house. Investors expect me to be online. You are trying to sabotage my career because you are a bitter person. Dad always said you were too vindictive. I slowly closed my laptop. I stood up, bringing myself face to face with the brother who had terrorized our mother. I did not raise my voice, but the venom in my words made him physically step back. Dad also said your third failed restaurant was a learning curve. While I had to take out student loans, I fired back seamlessly. Dad bailed you out every single time you failed, and you learned absolutely nothing. You shoved our mother into a shed and spent my money playing pretend CEO. Your free ride ends tonight. You have 55 minutes to empty the master suite before I call the officers back to escort you out. Jason stared at me, his mouth opening and closing silently. He had no leverage. He looked at Chelsea, then stormed down the hallway. Chelsea let out a cry and ran after him. I took a deep, steadying breath and turned my attention back to the living room. My mother was still sitting on the edge of the velvet sectional. She looked terrified, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, watching the entire exchange with wide, fearful eyes. I walked over to her, my expression softening immediately. I offered her my hand, pulling her gently up from the couch. Come on, Mom, I said softly. We are going to go out to the shed and we are going to pack up your things. You are moving into the master bedroom right now. Linda hesitated, her gaze darting nervously down the hallway where Jason and Chelsea had disappeared. Julia, are you sure about this? She whispered, her voice trembling. Jason is going to be so angry. He really needs that space. Jason is going to have to learn how to live in the real world, I replied, guiding her toward the back doors. And you are going to learn how to sleep in a real bed again. We walked back out into the blistering Texas heat and made our way to the miserable wooden shed. Inside, the oppressive heat was still suffocating. I grabbed the few cheap plastic storage bins stacked in the corner, marveling at how little my mother actually possessed. She had lived in this house for 2 years, and her entire existence had been condensed into 3 plastic boxes. We carried the bins back inside, waiting in the kitchen, until Jason and Chelsea angrily dragged 2 large suitcases out of the master suite and down the hall toward the smallest guest room. Once the master suite was finally clear, I led my mother inside. The room was massive, featuring a king-sized bed, a walk-in closet, and a luxurious ensuite bathroom. Linda stood in the doorway, staring at the space as if not allowed to enter. I set her plastic bins down on the plush carpet at the foot of the bed and began to unpack them. I wanted to get her settled immediately. I opened the top bin, pulling out a few neatly folded faded sweaters and a small stack of framed photographs. As I reached deeper into the box, my hand brushed against a thick, heavy stack of envelopes secured with a thick rubber band. I pulled the bundle out, intending to place it on the nightstand. But as the rubber band snapped against the paper, the envelopes shifted, revealing the bold red lettering printed across the front of the top envelope. Final notice. I froze. I looked at the envelope more closely. It was addressed to Linda, and the return address belonged to a major national credit card company. I flipped through the stack quickly. There were dozens of them. Final notices, urgent collection warnings, and threatening letters from various financial institutions, auto loan companies, and commercial banks. Every single one of them was addressed directly to my mother. My heart began to pound a slow, heavy rhythm against my ribs. I looked over at Linda. She was standing by the bedroom window, nervously smoothing down the curtains, completely unaware of what I was holding in my hands. I slid my index finger under the sealed flap of the top envelope and ripped it open. The thick paper tore with a sharp, violent sound. I pulled out the formal collection statement, unfolded it carefully, and scanned the bold numbers printed at the bottom of the page. My blood suddenly ran completely cold. The total financial debt listed on just this single isolated statement was absolutely astronomical. I stared at the bold numbers printed in red ink at the bottom of the page, my mind struggling to process the math. $42,000 on one single credit card. A card used exclusively for high-end boutiques and luxury cosmetics that Chelsea flaunted online. My mother had never set foot in those stores. I looked back up at Linda. She was still nervously adjusting the curtains, trying to make herself useful in a bedroom she felt she did not deserve to occupy. "Mom," I said, my voice coming out much sharper than I intended. I held up the collection notice. "What is this?" She turned around slowly, and the moment her eyes landed on the red lettering of the envelope in my hand, she physically shrank. Her shoulders slumped forward, and she wrapped her arms around her waist defensively. She stared down at the plush carpeting, unable to meet my furious gaze. "Julia, please do not be mad at your brother," she whispered, her voice trembling so badly. "I can explain everything. I am handling it all on my own." "Handling it," I repeated in utter disbelief. "Mom, this is a final collection notice for over $40,000. They are threatening legal action." I dropped the letter onto the bed and reached into the plastic bin, grabbing the rest of the thick stack of envelopes. "And there are dozens more in here. How long has this been going on behind my back?" Linda squeezed her eyes shut, and fresh tears began to spill down her cheeks. She pressed herself against the wall. "Jason just needed a little help getting his new company off the ground," she pleaded. "He promised he was going to pay it all back as soon as his startup secured its next round of funding." I sat on the mattress and pulled the rubber band off the stack of mail. I ripped open the envelopes one by one, laying the collection notices out across the bedspread. The reality of what my brother had done painted a horrifying picture across the white duvet. There were notices for defaulted business loans, maxed out corporate credit lines, and overdue personal loans. Every single document bore my mother's name as the primary account holder or the primary cosigner. I felt a cold, sickening wave of nausea wash over me. Jason had systematically weaponized her love and trust to build a financial empire on her back. "Mom, you co-signed all of these business loans for him?" I asked, gesturing wildly to the papers. Linda nodded slowly, her face buried in her hands. "He told me the banks were being unfair to young entrepreneurs," she sobbed quietly. "He told me that family supports each other, and if I really believed in him, I would help him secure his future. He swore he would handle the monthly payments. But then the startup ran into unexpected delays, and he said he just needed a few more months to turn a profit." I picked up another statement, my eyes zeroing in on a massive auto loan default from a luxury car dealership. The account was 90 days past due. Two vehicles were listed: a white Porsche Cayenne SUV parked in the driveway and a black luxury SUV Jason kept in the garage. Both leases were in Mom's name. "Mom, what is this?" I demanded, holding up the auto loan statement. "Please do not tell me you bought those cars for them." Linda let out a ragged sob and sank down onto the floor. Chelsea needed a safe, reliable vehicle for her brand. Linda cried, her voice muffled against her knees. She said her image was essential to her influencer partnerships. Jason said his clients needed to see him in something respectable so they would take his startup seriously. But why are they in your name? I pressed the anger in my chest, burning hotter than the Texas sun. Because Jason's credit was tied up with the business loans, she explained miserably. Chelsea told me that since I was living on their property rent-free, the least I could do was cover the car leases as my contribution to the household. She called it my rent for the shed. They convinced you to pay rent for a wooden shed in a house I bought for you. I stated their manipulation, leaving me breathless. I did the mental math. Between the business loans, the maxed-out credit cards, and the luxury car leases, my mother was drowning in over $150,000 of consumer and auto debt. Mom, how have you been making the minimum payments on any of this? I asked, softly, terrified of the answer. Your Social Security cannot possibly cover this financial burden. Linda looked up at me, her eyes hollow and completely defeated. It does not, she whispered. I had to cash out my retirement accounts. All of it. Everything I saved. It is all gone, Julia. I have nothing left in the bank. Every single penny is gone. The air in the room felt incredibly thick and suffocatingly heavy. My brother and his entitled wife had financially ruined her. They had drained her life savings and anchored her to catastrophic debt so they could play pretend in a luxurious suburban mansion. I looked at the exhausted woman sitting on the floor. She had given Jason everything, and he threw her into the yard like garbage when she had nothing left to give. I sat down directly on the floor next to her, gently wrapped my arms around her shaking shoulders. She buried her face deep into my shoulder and sobbed, finally releasing years of accumulated terror. I am so sorry, Julia, she wept. I was so ashamed. I did not want you to know what a mess I made. You have absolutely nothing to be ashamed of. I told her, my voice hard with absolute resolve. You trusted your son. He is the one who abused that trust. He is the one who should be terrified. I pulled back slightly, looking her straight in the eyes. I want you to listen to me very carefully, Mom. You are not going to pay another dime toward any of this debt. I am going to fix this. I am going to make sure Jason and Chelsea face every single consequence. Tonight, you are going to take a hot shower and sleep in a real bed. Let me handle the rest. I spent the next few hours helping her organize the bathroom and order dinner. I finally managed to go to sleep long after midnight, my mind racing with strategies. But my plans for a methodical investigation were shattered the very next morning. I suddenly woke up to the loud, relentless sound of my cell phone vibrating violently. It was barely 7 o'clock in the morning. I quickly grabbed the phone, my tired eyes squinting. I had exactly 27 missed calls and over 50 unread text messages. They were definitely not from Jason or Chelsea as I initially expected. They were from my aunts, my uncles, and several of my older cousins. Jason had apparently not waited for me to make the next move. Knowing that his financial crimes were about to be exposed, he had quickly launched a massive preemptive strike while I was fast asleep, spinning a desperate, completely fabricated, and spectacularly malicious lie to every single member of the entire extended family. I sat on the edge of the bed and tapped the first voicemail icon. The voice of my Aunt Carol filled this quiet room, her tone vibrating with righteous indignation. Julia, I cannot believe what I am hearing this morning. She began, her voice shrill and accusatory. Your brother called me in tears. He said you flew back into the country completely out of your mind and threatened to throw him and his fragile wife out onto the street. How could you be such a monster? Jason has been working so hard to build his company, and you just storm in there trying to ruin his life out of pure jealousy. I deleted the message and played the next one. This time it was my Uncle Richard. He did not even bother with a greeting. We all knew that working overseas for those soulless corporations was going to change you. But this is a new low, he barked into the phone. You have completely lost all sense of family loyalty. Jason is the man of the house, and he has been taking care of your mother while you were off living a lavish lifestyle. You need to formally apologize to him and Chelsea immediately, or you are no longer welcome at any family gathering. I listened carefully to 4 more consecutive messages, each one a variation of the same toxic narrative. Jason had played them all perfectly. He had strategically weaponized the entire family gossip mill, painting himself as the hard-working, dedicated son who was suddenly under attack by his unstable, wealthy sister. He knew exactly which buttons to push to turn our relatives into his personal attack dogs. He thought that by overwhelming me with family pressure and guilt, I would simply back down, pack my bags, and leave him to his stolen kingdom. He severely miscalculated the situation. I did not shed a single tear. I did not feel an ounce of guilt. I just felt a very deep, profoundly cold sense of absolute purpose. I tossed my phone onto the mattress, completely ignoring the continuous stream of incoming text messages, and stood up. It was time to start dismantling the comfortable life they had built on my mother's broken back. I walked out of the bedroom and made my way down the long carpeted hallway. The house was relatively quiet, but as I approached the sweeping wooden staircase, I heard a voice echoing up from the massive chef's kitchen. It was Chelsea. She had apparently recovered from the shock of the police visit the night before and was back to her usual self. I walked silently down the stairs and paused just outside the kitchen doorway. Chelsea was standing at the oversized granite island, wearing a fresh designer workout set. Her smartphone was propped up against a marble fruit bowl, broadcasting a video call on speakerphone. She was loudly venting to a group of her country club friends, her voice dripping with exaggerated distress while she casually chopped up organic fruit for a morning smoothie. "You guys just do not even understand the nightmare I am dealing with today," Chelsea complained, tossing a handful of berries into a blender. Jason's psycho sister just showed up out of nowhere. She is completely unhinged. She came barging in here, demanding things, trying to ruin my entire vibe. I swear she is just insanely jealous of my marriage and my brand. She has no life of her own, so she wants to destroy mine. It is honestly so toxic having her negative energy in my safe space. A loud chorus of overly sympathetic gasps and incredibly validating comments poured out from her phone speaker. Her wealthy friends eagerly fed into the ridiculous drama, calling me crazy and telling Chelsea she needed to protect her peace. I stepped fully into the kitchen, my footsteps completely silent on the polished hardwood floor. I took a moment to truly look around the room. The massive custom-built pantry doors were wide open, revealing shelves overflowing with high-end imported groceries. There were glass bottles of artisanal alkaline water, jars of organic truffles, premium matcha powders, and imported cheeses. The double-door stainless steel refrigerator was packed with prime cuts of meat, fresh cold-pressed juices, and expensive vintage wines. Every single item in this room had been paid for by my mother's credit cards. My mother, who had been eating cheap canned soup all alone in a sweltering wooden shed. I walked calmly over to the pantry and opened the tall utility cabinet tucked into the corner. I pulled out a heavy-duty black industrial trash bag and gave it a sharp flick, the plastic snapping loudly in the air. The sudden noise made Chelsea jump. She spun around, nearly dropping her expensive chef's knife on the granite counter. Her eyes widened as she saw me standing there, but before she could say a word, I just moved straight to the wide-open pantry. I held the black bag open with my left hand and began ruthlessly sweeping the contents of the shelves into the garbage with my right. Dozens of glass bottles of imported water crashed into the bottom of the bag. Expensive jars of organic almond butter, premium granola, and artisanal honey followed. I did not pause. I did not hesitate. I just moved with absolute maximum efficiency, clearing entire rows of stolen luxury in seconds. "What are you doing?" Chelsea shrieked, her voice pitching into a hysterical squeal. She lunged forward, her hands hovering in the air as if she wanted to stop me but was too afraid to get close. "Have you completely lost your mind? Stop touching my food. Those are all my imported groceries." I just ignored her completely and immediately moved over to the massive refrigerator. I pulled the doors wide open and started tossing out the expensive cheeses, the cold-pressed juices, and the prime steaks. Everything just went straight into the black trash bag. Chelsea scrambled over to her phone, snatching it off the marble bowl. "She is literally destroying my kitchen!" Chelsea screamed to her friends on the speakerphone, her voice cracking with actual panic now. "Call the police! Somebody call the police!" I stopped grabbing food for a brief second and looked directly at the phone in her hand. Call them, I said, projecting my voice so every single one of her country club friends could hear me loud and clear. Ask them to come back. And while you are on the phone, make sure you tell your friends that every single item in this kitchen was purchased using a stolen credit card that belongs to an innocent elderly woman. Tell them how you and your husband drained my mother's retirement accounts to fund your fake, pathetic influencer lifestyle. The loudspeaker phone went dead silent. Chelsea's face drained of all color, her jaw dropping open in absolute horror. She scrambled to frantically press the red end call button, terrified of what else I might reveal to her social circle. She stood frozen against the counter, clutching the phone to her chest, watching helplessly as I continued to methodically throw away the remainder of her stolen luxuries. The loud, crashing sound of glass shattering echoed through the entire house. Heavy footsteps pounded rapidly down the wooden staircase. Jason burst into the kitchen, his face flushed with rage. He let out a furious roar, charging forward and aggressively cornering me against the granite island. I did not flinch. He slammed his hands on the cold stone. His breath came in heavy gasps, his eyes wild with cornered panic. He leaned close, pointing a trembling finger in my face. "You are going to pay for replacing every item you just threw away," he hissed, his voice vibrating with malice. "You have always been jealous of me, Julia. You have always tried to tear down everything I build just because Mom loves me more." I stared into his furious eyes, unfazed by his pathetic attempt at intimidation. "You did not build anything, Jason," I said, keeping my voice dangerously steady. "You stole it. I know exactly what you did to our mother. I know about the defaulted business loans, the maxed-out credit cards, and the luxury car leases. I know you drained her retirement savings to fund this ridiculous charade." Jason scoffed, taking a step back and waving his hand as if financial abuse was a minor misunderstanding. "It was not stealing," he shot back, his tone dripping with self-righteousness. "It was a necessary investment in the family future. Startups require capital. Mom understood the vision, even if you are too narrow-minded to grasp it. She contributed to my success because she knows I will take care of her when the company goes public. You are trying to spin a normal business arrangement into a twisted crime." The sheer delusion of his justification made my stomach turn. There was no reasoning with a man who viewed his mother as a disposable line of credit. Engaging in a screaming match here was completely pointless. I needed cold, hard facts. I shoved past him, ignoring Chelsea whining from the corner, and walked straight out the front door. The Texas heat hit me immediately, but I needed fresh air to clear the suffocating toxicity of that house. I walked down the quiet suburban street and called an old friend who worked as a forensic accountant. I quickly explained the situation, detailing the collection notices I had found, and requesting an immediate deep dive investigation into Jason and Chelsea financial records. My friend promised to start pulling public filings and credit reports right away. I spent the rest of the day avoiding the house, sitting in a local coffee shop, drafting emails and securing my own personal accounts. I did not return until well after dark. The house was completely silent when I let myself in. I went to the master suite, checked on my mother, who was finally sleeping, and sat on the edge of the bed. It was nearly midnight when my phone vibrated. It was my accountant friend. "Julia," he said, his voice unusually grave and tight with concern. "I have been digging through the county property records and running cross-checks on the business entities associated with your brother. They did not just drain your mother accounts. It is much worse than that." My grip tightened on the phone. "Tell me everything," I demanded. "Someone initiated a $200,000 home equity line of credit on your house last week." He explained, his words dropping like heavy stones into my sinking stomach. "The application was filed against the property address, and the primary signature on the digital authorization documents is yours." The room seemed to spin. A $200,000 loan taken out against the home I had purchased with cash. Jason and Chelsea had forged my signature. They committed blatant, undeniable identity theft and wire fraud to secure a massive payout, essentially stealing the equity I built over 7 long years abroad. "Are the funds already cleared?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper, as the sheer scale of their criminality washed over me. "No," my friend replied quickly. "That is the only piece of good news here. Because of the size of the loan and the fact that you have no prior lending history with this specific banking institution, the final disbursement has a mandatory hold. The bank requires a final in-person notary verification to release the funds. They need a physical signature and an identity check. Your brother and his wife have been stalling the bank for 3 days, desperately trying to find a way to fake that final verification step. I ended the call and sat in the dark, my mind racing through a million different scenarios. My initial impulse was to kick down the guest room door, confront Jason with the evidence of his massive felony, and demand answers. But my corporate training immediately kicked in, overriding my anger with cold, calculating logic. If I confronted them now while they were safely inside the house, they would panic. They would undoubtedly attempt to destroy any physical documents, delete their digital trails, and immediately begin spinning a web of lies to protect themselves. I needed them to feel safe. I needed them to believe they had won, so they would make a mistake. The next morning, I walked into the kitchen where Jason and Chelsea were drinking coffee in tense silence. I let my shoulders slump forward, forcing my expression into a mask of exhausted defeat. I let out a long, heavy sigh and leaned against the counter, perfectly playing the role of a woman broken by family conflict. "You guys win," I said, keeping my voice quiet and emotionally drained. "The flying monkeys did their job. I have been getting calls from our aunts and uncles all night telling me what a horrible person I am for coming back here and causing so much trouble. The family pressure has really gotten to me. I cannot handle this toxic environment anymore." Jason perked up instantly, setting his coffee mug down on the granite counter. Chelsea exchanged a quick, victorious glance with him. "I am flying back to London for a few days to cool off and really think about family harmony." I continued, rubbing my temples as if fighting a massive headache. "I need some space to clear my head. We can revisit this entire living situation when I get back. In the meantime, Jason, you have exactly 1 week to start paying me a nominal rent if you want to stay here. Just something to cover the property taxes. We will discuss the details later." Jason and Chelsea swallowed the bait completely and absolutely. Jason offered a fake sympathetic nod, telling me that stepping away to gain some perspective was a very mature decision. He promised they would keep the house perfectly clean while I was gone. Before staging my departure, I took Mom to a nearby urgent care clinic. The physician treated her for dehydration, chemical irritation, and heat exhaustion, then photographed the blisters across her palms for the medical record. I told Jason and Chelsea that she was too overwhelmed to remain in the house and would stay with one of my old friends for several days. Neither of them asked for the address. I placed Mom in a private extended stay suite, reserved under my corporate account, arranged meal delivery, and hired a retired nurse to check on her twice a day. I kept her identification, medication, and financial documents in the hotel safe. Only after she was protected did I return to the house for my suitcase. 2 hours later, I rolled it down the driveway and climbed into a waiting rideshare. Chelsea stood on the porch with a triumphant smirk. The moment the car moved, she lifted her phone and began calling her friends. Jason watched from the window, convinced family pressure had driven me away. When we rounded the corner, I leaned toward the driver. "Change of destination," I said. "Take me to the downtown hotel." I was not leaving Austin. I was moving into position. The quiet luxury of the downtown hotel suite was the perfect sanctuary for the storm I was preparing to unleash. I unpacked my suitcase with deliberate movements, hanging my clothes in the closet before setting up my laptop on the desk, overlooking the bustling Austin skyline. My phone buzzed constantly with notifications, but I ignored the lingering texts from my manipulated extended family. Instead, I opened a fake social media account and navigated straight to Chelsea's public profile. She had not wasted a single second. Assuming my temporary retreat was a permanent surrender, she was already celebrating her perceived victory with obnoxious grandiosity. Her Instagram stories were a continuous, nauseating broadcast of absolute hubris. She was holding court in the massive chef's kitchen I owned, sipping champagne and announcing a spectacular high society dinner party she was hosting that coming Friday. She stared directly into her phone camera, flipping her hair as she bragged to her followers about curating an exclusive invite-only soiree at her private suburban estate. She claimed the event was a crucial networking opportunity to secure her highly coveted spot in an elite local country club. The sheer delusion of her posts was repulsive. I watched in cold silence as Chelsea documented her frantic, lavish preparations over the next 48 hours. She posted videos of herself directing a team of expensive local florists, pointing out where to place massive arrangements of imported white hydrangeas and cascading orchids throughout the grand foyer and formal dining room. She tagged high-end catering companies boasting about the custom tasting menu designed for her judgmental guests. Every boastful caption was a fresh layer of dirt on the grave she was digging for herself. She was trying to cement her status in the upper echelons of suburban society, using stolen money in a stolen house. While she selected vintage wines, I was hosting a very different gathering in my hotel suite. The door opened to admit two men who would become the architects of their rapid downfall. The first was Arthur Vance, a high-powered real estate attorney. The second was Detective Miller, a seasoned investigator from the local financial fraud department. I poured them both coffee and spread the thick stack of documents across the large glass coffee table. Arthur picked up the digital printouts of the $200,000 home equity line of credit application. He pulled a magnifying glass from his briefcase and scrutinized the signature page with silent concentration. He laid it next to a verified copy of my actual signature from the property deed. The forgery was incredibly arrogant and painfully sloppy. Jason had clearly attempted to mimic the sharp loops of my handwriting, but the pressure and spacing were entirely wrong. Detective Miller leaned over the table examining the digital timestamps and the IP address logs associated with the fraudulent loan application. He confirmed that the application had been submitted directly from the primary IP address registered to my suburban house. Jason and Chelsea had committed a massive federal crime from the comfort of my own living room. Arthur took extensive notes as I slid the secondary file folder toward Detective Miller. It contained the complete, horrifying record of my mother's financial destruction. I watched his jaw tighten as he leafed through the collection notices, maxed out credit cards, and defaulted auto loan statements for the two premium SUVs parked in my driveway. We spent the next several hours methodically cross-referencing the fraudulent credit card charges against Linda's accounts with Chelsea's meticulous social media documentation. It was a digital treasure trove of self-incrimination. Detective Miller pointed out a charge for $3,000 at a high-end boutique, and I immediately pulled up an Instagram post from that exact same date showing Chelsea flaunting a new designer handbag from that specific store. We matched a $4,000 charge at an elite med spa to her posts bragging about expensive facial treatments. We linked the exorbitant grocery bills I had purged from the pantry directly to the cards my mother had been forced to co-sign under extreme duress. Jason and Chelsea had not just drained Linda's life savings. They had left a bright neon trail of digital evidence detailing exactly how and where they had spent every single stolen penny. Detective Miller shook his head in absolute disgust, muttering that in his 2 decades of investigating financial abuse, he had rarely seen criminals so arrogant and careless with their paper trail. They felt completely invincible because they believed they were untouchable within the safety of the family unit. They believed my mother was too terrified to report them. Arthur gathered the forged home equity documents and stacked them neatly beside the evidence of elder financial abuse. He looked at me, his eyes sharp and entirely devoid of sympathy for my brother. The fraud committed here is extensive, felonious, and completely undeniable. Arthur stated, his voice carrying the heavy weight of impending legal doom. They have forged your signature on federal lending documents and engaged in systematic financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult. The fact that the $200,000 loan has not yet cleared final notary verification is our strongest leverage. Detective Miller agreed, tapping his pen against the glass table. We have enough probable cause right here to secure arrest warrants for both identity theft and wire fraud. I felt a cold, hard sense of satisfaction settle deep in my chest. I did not just want them removed from my property. I wanted them to lose absolutely everything they valued. Arthur opened his laptop and began typing rapidly, his fingers striking the keys with lethal precision. He was drafting an ironclad immediate eviction notice. Normally, the eviction process requires a standard 30-day notice, but Arthur explained that the rules change drastically when there is documented felonious activity occurring on the premises. Because Jason and Chelsea were using the property as a base to commit felony wire fraud and identity theft against the legal homeowner, the standard protections for tenants or guests were entirely nullified. I watched as the printer on the hotel desk hummed to life, sliding out the crisp white pages of their absolute destruction. Arthur stapled the documents together, the sharp sound echoing loudly in the quiet room. "This is not a request to vacate," Arthur told me, handing over the heavy legal packet. "This is a demand for immediate surrender of the property due to ongoing criminal enterprise. The local authorities will enforce this the moment we present the evidence." I took the packet, feeling the heavy, undeniable weight of justice resting in my hands. The eviction notice was flawless, citing the exact penal codes they had violated and demanding they leave the premises instantly or face immediate arrest for trespassing on top of the fraud charges. I looked down at my phone one last time. Chelsea had just posted a new update. She was standing in the grand foyer wearing a stunning evening gown, excitedly announcing that her high society dinner party was only 24 hours away. She promised her followers that Friday night was going to be an unforgettable, legendary event that would change her life forever. I smiled, a dark, dangerous expression spreading across my face. She was absolutely right. Friday night was going to be an unforgettable, legendary event, and I was going to make sure her country club friends had front row seats to the best show in town. Thursday began before sunrise. I sat at the hotel desk with 3 phones, 2 laptops, and the legal packet Arthur had completed the night before. The machinery of the plan was already moving. My first call went to the bank handling the fraudulent home equity line of credit. With Detective Miller on the conference line, I verified my identity, challenged the application, and demanded an immediate fraud hold. The bank's security director froze the $200,000 disbursement, canceled the scheduled notary appointment, and flagged the property title against any further lending activity. A certified copy of the forged application was preserved for investigators instead of being deleted. That mattered more than revenge. Jason and Chelsea could no longer damage the house, even if they realized I had never left Austin. Their largest escape route was closed. My second call was to the 3 credit card companies whose collection notices I had found in Mom's storage bin. Arthur submitted a formal elder financial exploitation notice and instructed each institution to preserve statements, device records, and merchant data. The accounts were frozen against new charges. The luxury vehicle lessor received the same evidence, including proof that Mom had been pressured into signing contracts while Jason and Chelsea used the cars. The company's recovery division confirmed that both leases were in severe default and approved immediate repossession. I also closed every access point they could use. The home insurer removed Jason and Chelsea as emergency contacts. The alarm company deleted their phone numbers and added a security phrase only Mom and I knew. I changed the recovery email on each account, canceled their saved payment permissions, and transferred the utilities into a protected profile. Arthur sent preservation demands to the internet provider and mobile carrier, so login records, device identifiers, and messages tied to the loan could not disappear. Their passwords still appeared to work, but every important system was under my control. They were celebrating inside a house that had quietly stopped obeying them. By 9 o'clock, Arthur arrived with a licensed process server named Marcus Reed. Marcus was tall, patient, and impossible to intimidate. He reviewed photographs of Jason and Chelsea, memorized the layout of the house, and placed 3 packets in a leather case. The first contained the immediate demand to surrender the property. The second preserved the civil claims arising from the forged loan application. The third outlined the financial exploitation evidence involving Mom's credit cards and vehicle leases. "I serve the papers directly into their hands," Marcus explained. "I state the time, the address, and the nature of the documents. I do not argue with them. If they refuse to take the packets, I place them at their feet and document the refusal. That is all I need," I said. "I want the room to understand that this is not a family disagreement. It is a legal consequence." At 11, a master locksmith named Raphael joined us. He carried a case of drills, replacement cylinders, and high-security deadbolts. I gave him proof of ownership and written authorization from Arthur. His job was simple. Once the papers were served and the officers confirmed the property was being surrendered, he would replace every exterior lock, reset the garage access codes, and erase all unauthorized smart home users. He would also change the keypad on the side gate so no copied key or saved password could bring Jason back. The towing company arrived after lunch. Its operations manager spread photographs of the white Porsche and the second luxury SUV across the table. Both vehicles were registered through leases attached to Mom's damaged credit. Recovery orders had already been issued. The drivers would wait out of sight until I gave the signal, then block the driveway and secure both vehicles without interfering with the guests' cars. "Do you want us to take them quietly?" the manager asked. I looked at Chelsea's newest social media post. She was standing beneath imported flowers in my foyer, announcing that 30 influential guests would witness the beginning of her next chapter. "No," I said. "Follow normal procedure. Ask for the keys in the house. State the reason clearly. Do not soften anything." Detective Miller coordinated the final layer. 2 uniformed officers would remain at the end of the street, close enough to respond but far enough away not to alert the party. Miller had no intention of turning the dinner into a reckless raid. The arrest warrants were still moving through review, and he wanted Jason and Chelsea separated from computers and documents before any search began. The officer's immediate role was to keep the peace, enforce the surrender order, and prevent either of them from destroying evidence or becoming violent. By Thursday evening, every person knew the sequence. Marcus would enter beside me. Raphael would remain near the foyer until service was complete. The towing representative would step forward only after the fraud was announced. The officers would move closer when Jason and Chelsea were ordered to pack. Arthur would monitor by phone, ready to answer any legal challenge. I would speak first and last. I slept for 4 uninterrupted hours that night, more than I had managed since landing in Texas. Friday moved with unnerving calm. I spent the morning reviewing the evidence again. The forged signature, the digital timestamps, the credit card statements, the photographs of Mom's hands, the urgent care report, the vehicle contracts, Chelsea's posts displaying purchases made on the same dates as the charges. Every page told the same story. They had treated love as permission, silence as consent, and my absence as an opportunity. At 6:30 that evening, I dressed in a dark tailored suit and drove with Marcus toward the suburb. Raphael followed in a service van without company markings. 2 tow trucks waited at a shopping center 3 blocks away. Detective Miller's unmarked sedan took position near the entrance to the neighborhood. We stopped at the end of my street. From the back seat of the black SUV, I watched valets guide luxury sedans into my driveway. Warm light poured from every window. A string quartet played near the living room, its music drifting faintly into the evening air whenever the front door opened. Through the dining room windows, I saw waiters carrying silver trays and guests raising champagne glasses. Chelsea had converted the house into a stage. Jason moved between investors in a tailored suit, gesturing expansively as if the walls, the land, and the future all belonged to him. My phone displayed one final message from the bank: fraud hold confirmed. No funds released. I forwarded the confirmation to Arthur and Detective Miller. Then I called Mom. Her voice was stronger than it had been 2 days earlier. "Are you sure you have to go inside?" she asked. "Yes. I do not want him to hurt you. He cannot hide behind you anymore," I said. "And tonight, he loses the house, the cars, and the lie." I ended the call and placed the phone in my pocket. Marcus closed his leather case. Raphael checked his tools. Behind us, the towing crews started their engines, and amber lights flashed once before going dark again. Detective Miller's sedan rolled slowly into position at the corner. I looked at the 3 professionals waiting for my signal. "Ready?" I asked. They nodded. The black SUV finally pulled away from the curb. The locksmith's van followed, then the 2 tow trucks. Together, the convoy turned into my driveway. The first tow truck rolled across the driveway just as a valet reached for the door of an arriving black sedan. He froze, confused by the sudden appearance of industrial equipment among the polished luxury cars. The second truck stopped behind it, sealing the driveway. Raphael parked his van near the front walk. Marcus and I stepped from the SUV together. Through the tall windows, I could see Chelsea standing at the head of the dining table in a silver evening gown. 30 guests filled the room, Men in tailored suits leaned toward Jason as he described his startup's expansion plans. Chelsea's country club friends admired the flowers over champagne. A string quartet played near the fireplace, and uniformed servers moved between the guests with trays of caviar and miniature lobster tarts. Everything inside had been purchased with someone else's money. The front door was unlocked to accommodate the valets. I pushed it open and entered without knocking. The quartet continued for several seconds before the first violinist noticed me. His bow slowed. The other musicians followed his gaze toward the foyer, and the music dissolved into an uncertain final note. Conversations faded in waves. One guest looked past me at the tow trucks, while another noticed Marcus carrying the thick leather case at my side. Chelsea had lifted her glass to make a toast. "To new beginnings," she announced, smiling brightly at the room. "And to the home that has made all of this possible." Her eyes found me before she could drink. The smile vanished. Jason turned toward the foyer. His face changed so quickly that the investor beside him stopped mid-sentence. Confidence drained from his posture, leaving only the panic of a man who knew the person he had defrauded was standing inside the property he had claimed as his own. Chelsea recovered first. "What are you doing here?" she demanded. Her voice carried across the silent room. She set her glass down too hard, splashing champagne onto the linen tablecloth. "I thought you were in London." "I know," I said. Jason placed his own glass on the table and forced a laugh. "Julia," he said, spreading his hands as if welcoming a difficult relative. "This is not a good time. We are hosting potential investors and some of Chelsea's close friends. Whatever family issue brought you back can wait until tomorrow." I walked farther into the room. Marcus remained one step behind me. Raphael closed the front door and stood near the foyer with his tool case. The towing manager waited beneath the chandelier holding a clipboard and 2 recovery orders. "This is not a family issue," I said. "It is a property fraud and financial exploitation issue." A low murmur moved around the table. Chelsea's cheeks flushed. "Do not bring your drama into my event." "Your event?" "Yes, my event in my home." I stopped beside the dining table. The white orchids Chelsea had ordered towered above silver bowls filled with ice. A dish of caviar sat untouched beside her place setting. I thought of Mom eating canned soup in a garden shed only yards from that table. I addressed the guests rather than Chelsea. "I apologize for interrupting your dinner. You came believing Jason and Chelsea owned this estate and that this address proved his financial stability. Those representations were false." Jason's forced smile disappeared. "Julia, stop." I continued. "My name is Julia Bennett. I am the sole legal owner of this house. I purchased it in cash 2 years ago for my mother's retirement. Jason and Chelsea have never owned any portion of the property. They have no lease, no equity, and no authority to use it as collateral or present it as a business asset." One of the investors, a gray-haired man seated near Jason, frowned. "You told us the property was held through your family trust." Jason raised both hands. "There is a misunderstanding. My sister has been overseas for years and she does not understand the family arrangement." "I understand the arrangement perfectly," I said. "You put our 60-year-old mother in an uninsulated garden shed, used her as unpaid domestic labor, drained her retirement accounts, and placed more than $150,000 of debt in her name." Someone gasped. A woman near Chelsea whispered, "The maid." Another guest turned toward the backyard windows where the shed was barely visible behind the hedges. Chelsea's face hardened. "Linda chose to stay there. She likes privacy. She was treated for heat exhaustion yesterday." That silenced her. I removed a certified copy of the urgent care report from my folder and placed it on the table. The photograph attached to the front showed Mom's blistered hands. Chelsea stared at it, then glanced toward her friends. Several of them pulled away from her as if the image itself were contagious. Jason stepped around the table. "This has gone far enough," he said quietly. "You need to leave before I call the police again." I looked through the front window. At the far end of the street, the patrol car's headlights switched on. "Call them," I said. "They already know I am here." His expression collapsed. I reached into my folder and withdrew a certified copy of the deed. I placed it beside the medical report, turning the first page toward the guests. The county seal and my full legal name were unmistakable. The gray-haired investor picked it up and read silently. He passed it to the woman beside him. Her eyes narrowed as she compared the document with the promotional materials Jason had given her. "This is her property," she said. "Not yours." Jason pointed at me. "She is twisting everything because she has always been jealous of my success." Even with the deed in an investor's hands and tow trucks visible outside, he reached for the same childhood lie. "There is one more reason I came tonight," I said. I turned toward Marcus. He opened his leather case and removed the first legal packet. Chelsea backed away from the table. "Who is he?" Marcus stepped into the center of the room. "My name is Marcus Reed. I am a licensed process server for Travis County." The words changed the air immediately. Several guests stood. Jason looked toward the kitchen, calculating whether he could escape through the back of the house. Marcus blocked the nearest path without touching him. "Jason Bennett," he announced, "you are being served with a demand for immediate surrender of the property civil claims arising from fraudulent use of the owner's identity and notice to preserve all documents and electronic devices connected to the attempted home equity loan." Jason stared at the packet as if it were a weapon. Marcus placed it directly into his hands. Then he turned to Chelsea. "Chelsea Bennett, you are being served with the same preservation notice and claims arising from financial exploitation, unauthorized credit charges, and use of fraudulently obtained assets." She refused to take the papers. Marcus lowered them carefully onto the table in front of her caviar plate. I looked at every guest in the room. "I apologize again for the disruption," I said. "I am the actual owner of this house, and your hosts are currently being served for felony fraud." The room erupted into shocked voices. Chairs scraped backward, phones appeared, and Marcus dropped the remaining thick stack of legal documents onto the dining table. Every lie Jason had sold them was collapsing in public page by page. Jason looked down at the documents in his hands, but he did not read them. His eyes moved frantically from the deed to the urgent care report, then toward the guests collecting coats. The legal packet was dangerous, but the social collapse terrified him more. "This is a private family matter," he said. "Everyone should sit down. We can resolve this calmly." No one sat. The gray-haired investor placed the deed back on the table. "You represented this property as an unencumbered asset supporting your company." "It does support the company," Jason insisted. "Julia is being technical about ownership. We have an informal family arrangement." "There is nothing informal about a forged loan application," I said. I opened the second folder and removed the home equity documents. Arthur had marked every relevant section with red tabs. I laid the application beside the deed so the guests could compare the signature Jason had submitted with my verified signature. Even without forensic training, the differences were obvious. The forged version was stiff and hesitant, with letters copied rather than naturally written. "The bank preserved the original digital application," I explained. "It was submitted from the internet address assigned to this house." The request sought a $200,000 line of credit against property Jason did not own. "The bank froze the disbursement this morning. Investigators also preserved the device and location records." Jason's face turned gray. Chelsea stared at him. "You told me the loan was already approved." Several heads turned toward her. She realized what she had admitted and pressed both hands over her mouth. Marcus calmly documented the statement in a small notebook. I removed the next stack. "These pages belong to Mom." Credit card statements, vehicle contracts, collection notices, and retirement withdrawal records covered the polished table. I placed the $42,000 card statement directly beside Chelsea's caviar plate. "This account belongs to Linda Bennett," I said. "She did not purchase designer handbags, cosmetic treatments, imported groceries, or the clothing worn at this party. Chelsea did." "That is not true," Chelsea snapped. I slid photographs across the table. Each came from her public account. A designer handbag photographed on the same date as a boutique charge. A med spa post matching a $4,000 transaction. A grocery delivery video matching purchases on Mom's card. A caption celebrating the white Porsche on the day the lease was signed under Mom's credit. Chelsea's country club friends began reading over one another's shoulders. One woman removed her phone and opened Chelsea's account, comparing the timestamps herself. "You posted all of this," she said. "They were gifts," Chelsea replied. "Linda wanted to support my brand." Linda was told the vehicle payments were her rent for sleeping in the shed. The woman's expression changed from confusion to disgust. Jason slammed the legal packet onto the table. "Mom signed everything voluntarily. She signed because you told her the family would collapse if she refused. You isolated her, controlled the mail, and used her fear of disappointing you. The credit companies have been notified of suspected elder financial exploitation. Every new charge is frozen and the records are being reviewed." Chelsea pointed toward the door. "Get out, all of you. This party is over." "You are correct," I said. "Your party is over." I looked toward Raphael. He placed his tool case on the marble console in the foyer and opened it. The click carried through the room. He removed a cordless drill, a replacement cylinder, and a high-security deadbolt. Chelsea's eyes widened. "What is he doing changing my locks? You cannot change them while we live here." Marcus lifted the surrender order. The documented criminal activity on the premises, combined with the owner's demand, and the officers standing by outside permits. Immediate surrender under the order you were served. Your attorney may challenge it later. Tonight you are leaving. Raphael moved to the front door. The drill started with a harsh mechanical scream. The sound tore through the formal dining room louder than the quartet had been. Metal filings fell onto the marble floor as he removed the first lock cylinder. Chelsea covered her ears. "Stop that," she shouted. "You are destroying the door." "I own the door," I said. She turned toward her guest, desperate to recover some authority. "This is what I have been dealing with. She is obsessed with humiliating us. She flew back from overseas because she could not stand seeing us happy." No one defended her. The woman who had compared the social media timestamps set down the photograph. "You told us Linda was your housekeeper." Chelsea's mouth opened. "You laughed about making her clean before brunch," the woman continued. "You said she was grateful for the work." "I was joking. You called her the maid." The words landed harder than mine. Chelsea's carefully constructed social image had depended on those women believing she was generous, successful, and refined. Now they were remembering every cruel joke she had offered as entertainment. One by one, guests began collecting handbags and jackets. A server quietly placed his tray on the sideboard and walked toward the kitchen. The quartet packed their instruments without being asked. Jason hurried after the gray-haired investor. "Please," he said, "do not make a decision based on an emotional presentation. My company is still viable. The loan issue can be corrected." The investor stopped near the foyer. "You used a house you did not own to prove solvency. You presented leased vehicles as business assets. You concealed personal debt and lied about a family trust. There is nothing to correct." He handed Jason's promotional folder back to him. "Our discussions are finished." Jason watched him leave, then turned toward the other investors. None would meet his eyes. They filed through the doorway while Raphael continued drilling inches away. Outside, the valets stood uncertainly beside the tow trucks and guests began calling for their cars. Chelsea followed her country club friends into the foyer. "Please do not leave like this," she begged. "We can explain everything over lunch. Julia has always hated me." One woman paused. "No," she said. "She showed us documents. You showed us a lifestyle purchased by an abused woman." The woman walked out. Chelsea's composure shattered. She grabbed a champagne glass from the console and threw it against the wall. Crystal exploded across the floor. The remaining guests recoiled. "You ruined my life," she screamed at me. "Do you understand how long it took me to get these people into this house? Do you know what this invitation was supposed to do for my reputation? You ruined your reputation when you called my mother a maid." Raphael removed the final section of the old lock. He held it up briefly, then dropped it into his case. The deadbolt that had protected Jason and Chelsea's illusion was gone. Marcus stepped between us as Chelsea moved forward. "Do not approach the property owner," he warned. She stopped, breathing hard. The room had emptied except for Jason, Chelsea, Marcus, Raphael, the towing manager, and me. Untouched food covered the table. Champagne bubbles died in abandoned glasses. Through the windows, amber lights began flashing across the front lawn. The towing manager checked the recovery orders on his clipboard and stepped into the dining room. Jason and Chelsea Bennett, he asked loudly. Neither answered immediately. He looked toward the driveway. Which one of you has the keys to the white Porsche and the black luxury SUV? Both vehicles are being repossessed here tonight. Chelsea stared at the towing manager as if he had announced a death. You are not touching those cars, she said. The leasing company terminated both agreements after receiving evidence of default and financial fraud. We are authorized to take possession immediately. Jason stepped forward. There has been a mistake. Those accounts are being restructured. They are not, I said. The lessor confirmed the balances, the missed payments, and the use of Linda's credit. The recovery authorization is final. Outside, one operator lowered the flatbed ramp behind the white Porsche. Amber light swept across the orchids in the foyer, washing the foyer in amber light. Chelsea dug through her silver clutch and pulled out a key fob. No, she said again, closing her fist around it. I need this car for my partnerships. My contracts require appearances. My entire brand depends on arriving in the right vehicle. You may surrender the keys or the operators will load the vehicles without them. The officers outside will assist if you interfere. She looked through the front windows. The patrol car had moved to the driveway. Two officers stood near the sidewalk watching calmly. Chelsea threw the key fob across the dining table. It landed on Mom's $42,000 statement and slid into the caviar dish. The manager retrieved it without reacting. Thank you. He turned and walked outside. Jason followed him into the foyer. Wait, the Porsche is mine. I stepped behind him. The Porsche is leased in Mom's name. I make the payments. You missed 3 of them. My company had temporary cash flow problems. You might have Mom liquidate her retirement accounts while you drove that car to investor meetings. He spun toward me. The arrogance had disappeared. His eyes were wet, and his voice dropped into the pleading tone he had always used when Mom was about to rescue him from consequences. Julia, please. Do not do this in front of everyone. The gray-haired investor was among them. He watched as steel cables were attached to the Porsche. Jason lowered his voice further. I know things got out of control. I know Mom should not have been in the shed. But we can fix this privately. I will move her back into the master bedroom. I will return some of the money when the company gets funded. Just stop the tow trucks and tell these people the loan application was a misunderstanding. He was offering Mom a room already restored and promising money he did not have. I looked him directly in the eyes. You made Mom live in a shed while you forged my name to steal $200,000, I said, projecting my voice through the open doorway. You do not have a family anymore. You have 30 minutes to pack one bag. The movers will place everything else in a storage unit tomorrow. Jason's face collapsed. You cannot mean that. I do. Where are we supposed to go? That is an executive decision for the man of the house. The gray-haired investor turned away in disgust. The winch started. The Porsche rolled slowly backward, its polished tires climbing the metal ramp. Chelsea rushed to the doorway and watched the car rise above the driveway. A broken sound escaped her throat. Then she turned on Jason. You promised me the deed was transferred, she said. He froze. You told me Julia had put the house in your name before she left the country. You told me the family trust owned everything. Chelsea, not now. You said the loan was legal. Keep your voice down. You dragged me into federal fraud. Jason grabbed her elbow, but she pulled away. You signed the applications too, he hissed. Do not pretend you knew nothing. You spent the money. I spent it because you told me we were protected. Her scream carried into the street. Chelsea shoved him in the chest. You are a broke fraud. There is no company, no trust, and no house. Jason stumbled backward into the dining table. A champagne bottle tipped over, spilling across the legal papers. Marcus lifted the documents out of the liquid while Raphael stepped between them. Both of you need to pack, Marcus said. The clock is running. Chelsea pointed at Jason with a shaking hand. I am calling my father. I am filing for divorce tomorrow. I will not go to prison for your pathetic startup. You used Mom's cards, Jason shouted. You wanted the Porsche, you wanted the party, and you told me you owned all of it. Their marriage broke apart in front of the people they had invited to admire it. The patrol officers entered the foyer when Chelsea raised her hand as if to strike him. One officer ordered them to separate. The second warned against violence or destroying evidence. Before the officers left, Detective Miller stepped from his sedan and collected the phones and computers listed in the order. He sealed Jason's laptop, Chelsea's tablet, and the printer used for the fraudulent application inside evidence bags. Neither of them had managed to erase the digital trail. The house was no longer protecting their secrets. It had become the place where those secrets were secured. That ended the argument. Jason and Chelsea ran upstairs. Doors slammed, drawers opened and closed. For 20 minutes, footsteps crossed the ceiling while Raphael reset every access code. I stood in the foyer holding the new brass keys. They returned with 2 oversized suitcases, 3 garment bags, and Chelsea's designer luggage stacked on top. Marcus reminded them that the order allowed only immediate necessities. Everything else would go to storage. Chelsea abandoned 2 garment bags rather than argue in front of the officers. At the doorway, Jason stopped beside me. "You will regret this," he whispered. "No," I said. "I regret leaving Mom alone with you." He searched my face for the sister who had once solved his emergencies. She was gone. Chelsea walked past without looking at me. On the porch, she saw the Porsche secured on the flatbed and began crying again. Jason tried to take her arm, but she pulled away and dragged her suitcase toward the curb. They ordered separate rides. The officers watched until both vehicles disappeared from the street. Marcus photographed the surrendered keys and signed the service record. Raphael finished the final lock, tested the deadbolt twice, and handed me the complete set. The towing trucks departed with the Porsche and SUV. Their amber lights vanished around the corner. For the first time since I arrived, the house belonged to the person whose name was on the deed. I locked the front door and called Mom. "It is over," I told her. "You can come home." Her voice broke. "Are they really gone?" "Yes." A car from the extended stay hotel brought her 40 minutes later. She stepped through the doorway carrying one small overnight bag and stopped when she saw the new lock. I placed a brass key in her palm. "This one is yours," I said. "No one can take it from you." Mom closed her fingers around the key and began to cry. This time the tears were not shame. They were relief. I guided her upstairs to the master bedroom. The house was quiet, the vehicles were gone, and every unauthorized code had been erased. Tomorrow would bring investigators, creditors, and the difficult work of rebuilding her finances. But that night, Mom slept in a real bed behind a door only we could open. The morning sun filtered through the massive bay windows of the living room, casting a warm and golden light across the polished hardwood floors of the grand foyer. For the first time in what felt like an absolute lifetime, the house was completely and blissfully silent. There was no shrill, echoing laughter from Chelsea as she paraded her fake wealth, no arrogant boasting from Jason on his endless business calls, and no heavy, entitled footsteps pacing up and down the upstairs hallways. It was just me, the quiet, steady hum of the kitchen refrigerator, and the incredibly sweet, intoxicating scent of genuine freedom. I woke up remarkably early, my mind sharp and focused, and immediately got to work. I did not want a single lingering trace of their toxic, parasitic presence remaining inside my home. By exactly 8 in the morning, a highly recommended professional cleaning crew, whom I had specifically hired on a premium emergency weekend rate, arrived at the front door. They brought heavy-duty industrial supplies, steam cleaners, and a very clear, uncompromising directive from me to meticulously scrub every single inch of the guest rooms and the main living spaces. I instructed the lead supervisor to gather any remaining designer toiletries, discarded items of clothing, or random pieces of trash that Chelsea and Jason had left behind in their frantic, disorganized midnight departure. I told them to throw it all directly into the heavy black municipal dumpsters located out back near the alleyway. I wanted the entire physical space completely purified and sanitized. While the dedicated crew worked diligently upstairs wiping away the physical remnants of the fraud, I moved into the main family kitchen to prepare our morning meal. For weeks, my vulnerable mother had been cruelly relegated to eating cold, unappetizing leftovers and cheap prepackaged sandwiches in the damp, drafty garden shed, while Jason and Chelsea feasted on extravagant, catered meals that were entirely paid for with her stolen retirement funds. Today, that profound indignity ended forever. I opened the large stainless steel refrigerator and pulled out fresh organic eggs, thick-cut premium bacon, and a loaf of artisan sourdough bread. I spent the next uninterrupted hour carefully preparing a lavish, comforting meal, exactly the kind of beautiful Sunday breakfast my mother used to make for me when I was a little girl growing up in our modest old house. The rich, savory smell of sizzling bacon and brewing dark roast coffee slowly filled the morning air, permanently replacing the lingering artificial scent of her ridiculously expensive and cloying perfume. I carefully arranged the hot food on my good porcelain china, poured a tall crystal glass of freshly squeezed orange juice, and carried the heavy silver serving tray into the formal dining room. Linda was already sitting quietly at the long mahogany table, looking peacefully out the large window at the manicured backyard and the blooming flowers. She was wearing a soft, clean cotton robe I had unpacked for her, her silver hair gently brushed and neat. When I set the warm, inviting plate directly in front of her, she did not flinch, cower, or shrink back in fear. For the first time in several agonizing years, the expression of perpetual, deep-seated terror and profound apology was completely gone from her weathered face. I sat down in the upholstered chair right next to her, wrapping my hands around my warm coffee mug to absorb the heat. We sat together in comfortable silence for a few long minutes, simply enjoying the safe quiet and completely unthreatened atmosphere. Then Linda slowly set her silver fork down on the linen placemat and looked directly into my eyes. The undeniable harsh reality of his extensive financial crimes had finally and completely shattered the golden child illusion she had desperately clung to for so incredibly long. She finally saw him not as the brilliant, misunderstood, and destined entrepreneur she always wanted him to be, but as the ruthless, manipulative, and sociopathic thief he truly was. Julia. My mother began, her voice trembling slightly with emotion, but remaining surprisingly clear and resonant in the quiet room. I do not even know how to begin to ask for your forgiveness. I sat back and watched him take absolute advantage of you. I foolishly let him push you away from this family. I was so incredibly desperate to believe in his business potential that I completely blinded myself to his obvious cruelty. I let him strip away my personal dignity, and I let him try to steal your future to fund his elaborate, disgusting lies. I reached across the smooth wooden table and took her frail, shaking hand firmly in mine. You were completely manipulated, Mom, I said softly, ensuring my tone carried nothing but absolute love and reassurance. He ruthlessly preyed on your unconditional love and your natural generosity. I knew exactly what he was doing every single step of the way, and he deliberately isolated you so you would not have the strength to question him. Linda shook her head slowly side to side, heavy tears welling in her tired eyes and spilling over her wrinkled cheeks. But I should have fiercely protected you, she whispered brokenly. I should have protected us both from him. Instead, I foolishly enabled him. I gave him unlimited access to the bank accounts. I blindly signed the legal papers he put in front of me, because he promised me it was just a temporary bridge loan to keep his startup afloat. I apologized to him when he yelled at me. I enabled his terrible abuse for so incredibly long, and it almost cost you absolutely everything you worked for. It did not cost me everything. I corrected, gently squeezing her hand. We are still sitting here together. The fraudulent home equity line has been canceled. Every account Jason touched is frozen, and Arthur is challenging the debts created for their lifestyle. Your Social Security now goes into a protected account that only you can access. We will rebuild what they damaged, one verified statement at a time. The house is secure, you are safe, and neither of them will ever control your money again. She squeezed my hand back tightly, a small, fragile, and incredibly genuine smile finally touching her lips. We finished our delicious breakfast in a comfortable, deeply healing silence, the heavy, suffocating burden of the past finally and permanently lifting from our collective shoulders. As I was gathering the empty porcelain plates and carrying them back into the kitchen to wash, my cell phone suddenly buzzed loudly and aggressively against the cold marble countertop. I casually glanced down at the bright screen and instantly felt a cold, familiar knot form deep inside my stomach. The caller identification boldly displayed the name of my Aunt Susan, my older sister, and the very loud, very opinionated, unofficial matriarch of our entire extended family. Just a single week ago, Susan had angrily called me a heartless monster over the phone. She had completely swallowed Jason fabricated pitiful sob stories and Chelsea vicious calculated rumors. She had loudly accused me of being a jealous, bitter, and entirely unsuccessful woman who was desperately trying to sabotage her brilliant, successful brother out of pure, unadulterated spite. I took a deep, steadying breath, mentally braced myself for another exhausting barrage of loud accusations, and calmly answered the call. "Hello, Aunt Susan," I said smoothly, maintaining my calm, deeply professional corporate tone of voice. "Julia." Susan gasped loudly, her voice incredibly frantic, panicked, and completely breathless. "The police reports have become public record and Jason has asked them for bail money." I stood in the pristine kitchen, listening to the frantic, panicked breathing echoing through the phone speaker. Aunt Susan was rambling, her words tripping over themselves as she read aloud from a local news blog that had just published the morning arrest logs. She told me that Jason had been detained at a cheap budget hotel just outside the city limits at 6 in the morning. He was formally charged with attempted federal wire fraud and felony identity theft. The bail was set at $250,000, a number he obviously could not meet because every single one of his fraudulent accounts had been frozen by federal investigators. Susan was waiting for me to act shocked. She was waiting for me to break down, to offer to help my brother, to dip into my own savings to save the family reputation. Instead, I took a slow, deliberate sip of my dark roast coffee. "I know, Susan," I replied, my voice completely devoid of any emotion. "I am the one who handed the forged home equity loan documents to the authorities. I am the one who provided the financial records proving he stole from our mother." There was a long, heavy silence on the other end of the line. The reality of the situation was finally crashing down upon the extended family. For months, they had eagerly consumed Jason's fabricated lies. They had praised his imaginary startup success, attended his lavish dinners funded by elder abuse, and readily labeled me as the bitter, jealous sister who just wanted to ruin his happiness. Now, staring at the irrefutable public police reports, the grand illusion was completely shattered. "But he asked us for bail money," Susan whispered, her tone shifting from panic to profound horror. "He told your Uncle Robert that this was all just a massive misunderstanding. He begged us to take out a second mortgage on our house to get him out of the county holding cell." "Do whatever you want with your own money, Aunt Susan," I stated firmly. "But understand that if you give that thief a single cent, you are funding a man who forced his own vulnerable mother to live in a damp, uninsulated garden shed while he leased luxury sports cars. He is a predator. If you bail him out, do not ever contact me or Linda again." She hung up the phone without another word. Over the next 48 hours, the news ripped through the extended family network like a devastating wildfire. The same aunts and cousins who had previously condemned my actions were suddenly tripping over themselves to distance their own reputations from Jason. The family text groups were dissolved. The holiday invitations were permanently revoked. When Jason used his single allotted phone call from the holding facility to try and manipulate our grandmother into posting his bail, she flatly refused and hung up on him. The extended family, finally realizing the terrifying magnitude of the truth, completely and permanently cut him off. The legal repair of Mom's finances took longer than the public collapse, but it finally gave her the consequence she needed most: freedom from their debt. Arthur filed formal fraud disputes with every lender, attaching the urgent care report, the collection notices, Chelsea's social media receipts, and Detective Miller's case number. The $42,000 credit card account was frozen first. Investigators matched the purchases to Chelsea's devices and delivery addresses, and the issuer removed the disputed charges from Mom's active balance while the criminal case proceeded. The vehicle company repossessed both cars, canceled future lease obligations, and added its losses to the restitution claim against Jason and Chelsea. The bank permanently canceled the $200,000 home equity line before a single dollar was released. It also placed a title alert on the house, preserving every application record for prosecutors. We froze Mom's credit with all three bureaus, replaced her compromised identification numbers, and moved her Social Security deposits into a new account that Jason had never seen. Every emergency contact password recovery email and automatic payment was changed. Not every dollar from her retirement accounts returned overnight. Some of the withdrawals had been made after she signed documents Jason placed in front of her, which meant Arthur had to prove coercion and financial exploitation rather than simple identity theft. He filed a civil restitution claim, supported by the recording's medical evidence bank records and Jason's own messages, promising to repay her once his imaginary company became profitable. The court ordered the remaining disputed collections suspended while the case was reviewed. Arthur also created a protected monthly budget, so future bills could be verified without surrendering control to anyone else. For the first time in years, Mom's phone stopped ringing with threats from creditors. No new envelope arrived demanding money for a car she never drove or a handbag she never owned. Her credit report no longer controlled her breathing. The numbers were still being repaired, but the trap had been opened. Jason and Chelsea could no longer spend in her name, contact her lenders, or reach any account connected to her future. Without the shield of stolen funds and fake prestige, the dominoes of Jason's fabricated life collapsed with breathtaking speed. A brief flash forward into the following weeks detailed the absolute totality of his ruin. The local business community completely blacklisted him. The investors he had been desperately trying to court read the public fraud allegations and immediately severed all ties. But the ultimate and most satisfying betrayal came from inside his own camp. Chelsea, the woman who had happily reaped the benefits of his elder abuse, realized the money had permanently dried up. The moment she understood the truth, she panicked. The moment she understood that the sports cars were repossessed, the bank accounts were seized, and there would be no more catered country club dinners or expensive caviar, her loyalty vanished into thin air. She did not visit him in this county jail. She did not attempt to hire him a defense attorney. Instead, she immediately packed her designer bags and moved back into her parents' sprawling estate. Less than a week after his arrest, Chelsea formally filed for a contested divorce. She hired a ruthless, high-priced attorney to draft a public statement, claiming she was merely a naive, innocent victim of Jason's elaborate financial deceptions. She legally severed herself from his sinking ship, leaving him entirely alone to navigate the terrifying federal legal system from the confines of a cheap, dingy motel room once he was finally released on a heavily restricted state-funded bond program. He had no private lawyer, no luxury vehicles, no adoring wife, and absolutely no family left to manipulate. With the immediate threat neutralized and the perpetrators facing their rightful legal consequences, I expected to feel a profound sense of peace. I expected the house to finally feel like a home again. I had hired the best professional cleaning crews to scrub every inch of the property. I had thrown away the expensive, tacky furniture Chelsea had purchased with Linda's stolen retirement money. I had restored the grand dining room and the beautiful chef's kitchen to their original, elegant state. I even had the locks changed twice, just to be absolutely certain the perimeter was secure. Yet, as the weeks passed, a quiet, lingering unease began to settle deep into my bones. I would walk down the grand mahogany staircase in the morning and vividly remember his face. I would vividly remember the sight of Jason dragging his suitcases out the door. I would sit at the granite kitchen island with my coffee and perfectly recall the shrill, entitled sound of Chelsea laughing with her fake friends. I would look out the large bay windows toward the backyard and feel a cold knot form in my stomach as my eyes landed on the garden shed where they had so cruelly banished our mother. The physical stains had been bleached away, but the toxic, suffocating memories were permanently embedded into the drywall. This beautiful suburban estate, currently valued at over $800,000, was no longer a symbol of my hard work and success. It had become a sprawling, echoing monument to the worst chapter of our lives. It was the place where my signature was forged, where my mother was abused, and where my brother lived. It was the place where my brother had tried to orchestrate my total financial destruction. I sat in this quiet living room one evening, watching the sunset cast long, stretching shadows across the hardwood floors. Linda was resting peacefully upstairs, finally safe and comfortable, but I knew she felt the exact same lingering ghosts that I did. She rarely walked into the formal dining room, and she avoided looking out the back windows altogether. The house was dragging us backward into the trauma we were desperately trying to escape. I pulled out my laptop and opened my financial portfolio. I stared at the property valuation and the equity I had meticulously built over the past decade. Jason had targeted this specific asset because it was stationary, valuable, and deeply tied to the family legacy. He had assumed that because I loved the house, I would be vulnerable. He was completely wrong. I am not emotionally tethered to wood and concrete. I closed the laptop, my decision made with absolute, unwavering clarity. I was going to sell the estate, take the cash, and completely eradicate his ability to ever access us again by moving us very far away forever, starting right today. The very next morning, I contacted the most aggressive luxury real estate broker in Austin. I did not want the property sitting on the market for months, lingering like an open wound, and giving Jason any false hope that I might change my mind. The housing market was experiencing an unprecedented meteoric surge, and the broker assured me that a pristine, fully updated suburban estate in that specific highly coveted zip code would ignite an immediate bidding war. The incredibly vibrant local economy had drawn wealthy buyers from across the country, creating a perfect storm of immense demand and incredibly low inventory for sellers who were ready to move quickly. She was absolutely right. Within 48 hours of listing the property, we received 6 cash offers, each one escalating well above the initial asking price. I accepted the highest offer for a massive, undeniable profit, finalizing all the extensive legal paperwork with a cold, clinical efficiency that left no room for error. Watching the massive sum hit my private bank account was deeply satisfying, but it was merely the necessary fuel for my ultimate goal. I was not just buying a new home. I was purchasing an impenetrable fortress where the past could never hurt us again. I spent weeks meticulously researching the most exclusive 55 and older resort communities in the state. I finally found the perfect location, an upscale, fiercely guarded enclave situated on a pristine private lake. The community offered resort-style amenities, daily social events, and a vibrant culture designed specifically for active seniors. But the true selling point was the unparalleled security infrastructure. The entire sprawling property was surrounded by heavy wrought iron fencing, monitored around the clock by high-definition cameras, and patrolled by a dedicated private security force. I purchased a stunning luxury penthouse on the top floor of their premier building. It featured floor-to-ceiling windows, a gourmet kitchen, and a sprawling wraparound balcony overlooking the water. Before moving Linda in, I scheduled a private meeting with the head of community security. I handed him a thick folder containing Jason's photograph, his criminal records, and copies of the police reports. I gave them strict, uncompromising orders that under no circumstances was that man ever to be allowed past the front gate. The security chief took the folder, looked me dead in the eye, and promised me that my brother would be immediately arrested for criminal trespassing the exact second he even approached the perimeter. Moving Linda into this penthouse was a profound emotional milestone for both of us. The transition was seamless, and the change in her demeanor was nothing short of miraculous. Within days, the hollow, haunted look that had plagued her since Jason cruelly forced her into that damp garden shed completely vanished. She began attending morning water aerobics, joining a weekly book club, and finding her own voice again. The vibrant community embraced her with open arms, completely unaware of the deeply traumatic nightmare she had just survived. She was finally living the beautiful, carefree retirement that I had always intended for her, entirely insulated from the toxic greed and manipulation that had almost destroyed her golden years. I stood on the sprawling balcony of her new penthouse, the warm evening breeze gently washing over me. Through the open sliding glass doors, I could hear the bright, genuine sound of Linda laughing uncontrollably. She was hosting a small dinner party for a wonderful new group of friends she had met at the community clubhouse. The rich smell of baked salmon and the cheerful clinking of crystal wine glasses drifted out into the peaceful night air. It was the sound of absolute safety. Suddenly, the cell phone in my pocket vibrated aggressively against my leg. I pulled it out and looked at the glowing screen. It was an unknown number, almost certainly Jason trying to reach out from a cheap prepaid burner phone to beg for a desperate financial handout from whatever dingy motel room he was hiding in. I did not feel a single ounce of pity, guilt, or hesitation. I smiled a calm, completely satisfied smile, pressed the block button, and slipped the phone back into my pocket. I turned my attention back to the spectacular sunset painting the Texas sky in brilliant shades of orange and purple over the tranquil lake. I had permanently lost a brother, but I had saved my mother, and most importantly, I had reclaimed my own absolute power. The most profound lesson we can take from these experiences is that your self-worth is never defined by the people who are unable or unwilling to see it. In many toxic family dynamics, we are conditioned from a young age to believe that loyalty requires enduring endless disrespect. We are taught to shrink ourselves to maintain a fragile peace, to accept the painful role of the scapegoat, and to continuously sacrifice our well-being to prop up a golden child. But true family is not simply a matter of shared DNA. True family is built on a foundation of mutual respect, unconditional support, and showing up when it truly matters. When you realize that your love resources and accomplishments are being exploited, you face a terrifying but necessary choice. Setting firm, uncompromising boundaries is never an act of cruelty. It is an act of profound self-love and preservation. It takes immense courage to stop seeking validation from those who consistently withhold it. Manipulators rely on your silence and your innate desire for family harmony to maintain their control. The moment you refuse to play your assigned role, their entire toxic structure inevitably crumbles. You have the absolute right to walk away from toxicity and protect your peace. You are allowed to build a chosen family, composed of people who celebrate your authentic self, rather than demanding you diminish your light. Reclaiming your power means boldly stepping into your own unshakable truth and leaving behind anyone who tries to hold you back. If you have ever had to walk away from toxic family members to protect your peace and rebuild your life on your own terms, share your journey of reclaiming your power in the comments below. Hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more empowering stories about resilience and setting boundaries. Remember that you always deserve a life where you are celebrated, not just tolerated.